people shinobi no kami here. In this fanfic Naruto trains a lot harder than the canon and strives to become the best. This story starts right after the Sasuke retrieval mission. Hope you enjoy this fanfic. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment if you want to suggest any other fanfics for me to read. Check the description for credits and support the creator of this story. So let us begin. Chapter 5. An Angel's Dilemma. Conan walked along the cold and dark halls of the tower she and Nagato had taken as their base of operations. Like all places in a megacure village hidden in the rain, the building was the epitome of industrial-style architecture. Pipes ran along the walls and ceiling. The entire building was made of metal rather than wood or brick and gave the entire infrastructure a cold, unfeeling air. It was the same everywhere in AIM too. Yet Conan noticed none of this as she walked through the hall, having long since grown used to the cold and unfeeling structures. She came to a stop at a door at the end of the hall. Opening it, she walked in and moved to the back where there was an opening leading to the outside. Like always, Nagato's God realm path or pain as he had taken to calling himself was there. He was sitting on the ledge as he looked out over AIM. The man did not even seem to notice the rain that was hitting him, though it probably had to do with the fact that the rain was nothing more than a byproduct of his sensory jutsu he used. A small twinge of pain caused a slight falter in Conan's steps as she walked up to what had once been the body of their friend. It was one of the few things that made her weary of the man she called a brother. "You have need of my services, Pain-sama?" she asked as she walked up behind Pain. For a while Pain didn't speak as he continued staring out over the city. His city. Finally, an intruder was able to get into a megacure undetected. Conan felt a small slip in her emotional mask as her eyes widened ever so slightly. Pain was able to sense everything that happened in AIM with his jutsu, so for someone to be able to slip past his guard meant whoever it was an expert in stealth and not only knew that the jutsu was there but also its weakness. "I was only able to sense him as he was leaving my range. I want you to find this person and deal with them. We can't have someone finding out where Akatsuki is located yet. If they have left AIM, I will need you to get in touch with Zetsu and track them down." "Of course, Pain-sama," Conan said in an emotionless voice as she put her mask back in place. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. A small green toad with orange spots hopped into a rather spacious cave. It was highly unusual for an amphibian to seek shelter in a cave during the rain. Most would assume that a toad would find it enjoyable to be in the rain, probably by some kind of lake or pond to allow the cool water to hit their skin as they swam or lazed about. However, while the toad looked completely normal to most people, the two people who were familiar with toads knew better. The fact that this toad was anything but normal became apparent when it opened its mouth and a young man crawled out, his form looking as if it was stretching while in the mouth. The person soon revealed himself to a man with spiky blonde hair and blue eyes, wearing a long black hooded cloak that reached to the ground and covered his entire frame. He was wearing a black face mask that covered the bottom half of his face and had a Konoha Hida 8 on his forehead. Grabbing a scroll from his pouch, the blonde unrolled it and channeled some chakra into the scroll, causing a puff of smoke to signal the contents being unsealed as a small pile of firewood appeared. The blonde set up a small fire pit and pulled out another scroll. Unsealing it revealed the contents to be fresh meat. Starting a fire, the blonde stuck the meat on a spit and began to cook it over the open fire, adding spices as he rotated the spit. When it was done, he brought a hand to his mask and pulled it off, revealing 6 whisker marks on his face. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze leaned back against the wall of the cave as he ate his food, his mind thinking about all that had happened in recent years. It had been about 2 years and 9 months since he had left on his trip with Ero-sensei. Naruto had learned many things in that time. He now had a powerful reputation and skills that Jiraiya said may be on par or better than or possibly even his father, though Naruto felt he still had a long ways to go before he compared himself to his old man. Naruto had also started learning the ins and outs of Jiraiya's spy network. A year ago, the blonde had been officially introduced as the second in command and the one to take over in case something happened to Jiraiya. After learning about the spy and information gathering business, the young Uzumaki Namikaze heir had set himself to building one of his own in secret. While it still was not as vast as his sensei's, the blonde had been able to get information faster than Jiraiya could with his network. This was due to the fact that Naruto had not used other people for his network but rather an extensive array of seals partially based off of the crystal spy orb that the Sandaime Hokage used to keep an eye on the village. The seal was called an information sealing array. What it did was pick up the vibrations and wavelengths that people spoke in. Those wavelengths and vibrations were sent through several seals that translated them into words. The words would travel through another set of seals and into one of several specially designed cage bushins variants that Naruto had sealed into a containment seal. Every month several clones would disperse and send information to Naruto, who would have to take a day to sort through it all. This was easily Naruto's greatest and most extensive accomplishment with seals. Of course, like with all great ideas and abilities, this one had several drawbacks that made it problematic. The first was that when the clones dispelled themselves and sent information to Naruto, it would take a full day of meditation to sort through them. This required him to find a safe place to be as he sorted through the information. If he was in battle, it could easily leave him vulnerable to attack. The problem itself was mostly solved as Naruto had set up two safe houses where he could Hiraishin Ch should he require it. One was in Kiri and the other was in Kumo. His second problem was that eventually his seals would run out of clones to send him information. Each one had a total of 500, so it would be a while before it ran out, but it would eventually become a problem. The third problem was the information itself. When Naruto started putting the seal arrays around the cities he visited, he did not limit himself to one place per city. Naruto had placed several seals in each city, places like bars, taverns, whorehouses, theaters. Naruto even had several in the council rooms and cage towers of both Kiri and Kumo. A lot of information came in from those places and most of it was useless to Naruto. This meant he had to separate the trash from any useful information he got. And while it was nice to hear how Mei, Yugito and Koyuki were doing, he could see them whenever he wanted, so it did not matter. No, Naruto was after specific information, namely he wanted to know everything he could about Akatsuki. Unfortunately, his network had drawn up mostly blanks. The only information that was available on the group was already known to him. They had started off as a mercenary unit, taking jobs for a small fee, and because they gained a reputation of never failing a mission, they began to get more and more jobs. After a while they began to express an interest in Jinchuriki and Biju in general, though so far they seemed to have only gone after Naruto himself. Other than that, nothing had come up. The only thing he had been able to learn about the group was that there was not much to learn. Naruto only had one piece of information that he had decided to follow up, and it was more a matter of having a gap in his info rather than actual information itself. A megacure. The hidden village had been in a lockdown for several years now. No one really knew the true reason, but rumor had it that the village had been experiencing a civil war. Seeing as how he had no other leads to follow, Naruto had decided to go to a megacure, not bothering to tell even his sensei of his journey to the hidden village. When he got there, he had still not been able to find out much in the way of knowledge on Akatsuki themselves. He had been there for about 2 weeks, but all he had found out was info about the two figures that were said to rule the village. A man known as Pain, who was said to have killed Hanzo the Salamander in single combat, an incredible feat considering the man had been rumored to be even stronger than Hiraishin Sarutobi the professor in his prime. This Pain also seemed to have a deep grudge against Hanzo, having killed not only anyone associated with the man but his family as well. The other figure was known simply as the Angel of Aim. Apparently it was a woman who was seen as Pain's messenger to the people. He had not been able to find out much more other than that Pain was hailed as a god and had a powerful sensor jutsu where he infused his chakra into the rain. Naruto snapped out of his musings when he felt a presence just outside the cave trip. A few sensor seals he had placed here before he went into aim. He created a quick cage bushin to clean up the mess he made while he went outside to investigate. Creeping outside the cave, Naruto looked around the forested area. Finding nothing, he frowned. He was just about to go back inside when instincts had him rolling to the left, just in time as several shuriken came and impaled the spot he had been previously standing. He took a moment to observe the spot where he was standing and saw that the shuriken were white. Is that paper? Naruto questioned before he dodged another set of shuriken. Naruto quickly created a cage bushin before replacing himself with it, and then hiding himself in the forest as he gained a quick breath and came up with a strategy. Creating several clones, Naruto had each of them put the invisibility jutsu over themselves and move out to find the person who had attacked him. Hiding as well, Naruto crouched down on a tree as he waited for the information to come to him. When it did, Naruto found himself getting the image of a woman with blue hair and an origami flower in it and an Akatsuki cloak. She matches the description of the so-called Angel of Aim, but there is also something familiar about her. Deciding not to waste another minute, Naruto shot towards where the woman was found. Shooting out of the trees, he headed straight for the blue-haired woman. Naruto reached into his pouch and pulled out several kunai. Throwing them, he raised an open palm towards the sailing weapons. Fuden. Repusho. Wind release. Wind gale palm. A gale of wind shot from Naruto's palm and increased the speed of the kunai. The woman with blue hair was not expecting the attack and therefore found herself unable to dodge them all and ended up getting a few small cuts. In retaliation, she made several paper shuriken out of her cloak, which seemed to be able to turn to paper at will. She launched them at Naruto, who made a slashing motion and sent a Kase no Yaiba wind blade towards them. The paper shuriken were shredded as the Kase no Yaiba continued on. The Angel of Aim created paper wings out of her cloak, which merged with her back and used them to soar into the air and evade Naruto's attack. With a great flap of her wings, several thousand paper senbon were shot towards Naruto in a literal hailstorm. Unsealing Susanna, Naruto began a deadly dance as he dodged and weaved between the senbon. Unleashing blasts of wind with his blade, hundreds of the chakra-coated paper senbon were either blown away or cut to ribbons. Naruto took a deep breath as the small cuts from the senbon he could not dodge healed. Looking up, he saw that the blue-haired woman was still in the air. Deciding to bring her down, Naruto launched several powerful blasts of lightning from his sword. As the woman began to focus on dodging, he created a cage Bushin who disappeared in a burst of speed. Konan continued to dodge the blasts of lightning, and while she kept a calm outward appearance, she was mentally cursing, whoever this cloaked figure was good. So far none of her attacks had any real effect, and while she knew her power was not the strongest in Akatsuki, she was still around the middle ranking in terms of strength and most people were unable to counter them so effectively. Usually they were too busy being surprised by the fact that paper could actually be used as a weapon to do anything. Deciding that she had to caught this shinobi by surprise, she began to disperse into paper. However, her concentration was broken when both of her wings were sliced to pieces. Turning around, she felt her eyes widen as she saw the blonde ninja that had been attacking her right behind her. She was not given the chance to do anything as the blonde sent a kick into her sternum. She soon fell through the tree branches, breaking a few on the way down, and it was only thanks her perfect chakra control that allowed her to form her wings to stop her descent while creating a small chakra shield to block out the wind resistance. Landing on the ground, she was soon forced to duck under a punch from her blonde attacker. She jumped back to gain some distance, but it was no use as the shinobi before her kept on the pressure. Realizing that she would need to fight back, Konan channeled chakra through her hands, turning them into paper blades and using her chakra to make them hard. She began to attack the blonde using swift strikes with the intent to kill, aiming for vital points like the trachea and lungs. Naruto soon found himself on the defensive as he was forced to dodge and weave through her paper blades. The woman had an excellent style that was able to fully utilize her agile body. Unsealing Susanna again, Naruto began to meet her strike for strike. Several tears appeared on their clothes as the two continued to battle, but neither was able to get a good hit on the other. Naruto, while physically far more powerful and faster than Konan, he was hard matched to fight someone with two blades, having not done it before and was having a hard time keeping track of both blades. Ducking a horizontal slash, he was soon forced to dodge a thrust sent to impale his eye. Turning around in a 360 degrees counterclockwise motion, Naruto blocked another strike from her left hand. He tilted his head back to dodge a slice meant to open his neck, then brought his sword up in front of him to block her other hand. Deciding he needed to be on the defensive if he was going to beat this woman, Naruto began channeling wind chakra through Susanna. Making a slashing motion with his blade, Naruto cut clean through the woman's paper blades. Said woman leapt back as Naruto's sword passed through where she had been previously. The woman was just about to charge in again when she felt a prick on the back of her neck, then everything went black. The Naruto in front of her dispelled in a puff of smoke as the real Naruto wrapped his arms around Konan's waist. Picking her up in a bridal carry, he made his way back to the cave. XXXXXXXXXXXXX, Konan groaned as she woke up and for a moment wondered where she was. Her eyes opened to try and discern her location, but all she could see at the moment were blurs. As she shook her head to clear her vision, she tried to remember what happened. Nagato. Pain, she reminded herself, had sent her on a mission to deal with someone who had managed to evade his censor jutsu until he was nearly out of the village. That was when she remembered she found him and they had fought. However, after that everything went blank and she couldn't remember anything else afterwards but assumed she had been defeated. Though that begged the question of why was she still alive. I'm glad to see you're finally awake. Her head snapped to the source of the voice and saw that it was that blonde shinobi sitting near a fire as he cooked some kind of stew over it. Her eyes widened and she tried to get up only to realize that she was tied and bound. She looked down at herself to see .8 grade ninja wire binding her arms and legs together. She immediately began to try and channel chakra to cut the ropes but soon found out that she could not even feel her chakra. That won't work, the blonde said from where he was, making it obvious he knew what she was trying to do. Conan snarled at the man as real emotion showed up on her face for the first time in years. What did you do to me? I sealed off your chakra, the blonde said with a shrug as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Conan's eyes widened. What? Would you stop shouting? Naruto said in an annoyed tone. Since you attacked me I decided to seal off your chakra. He looked at Conan and she could almost see the smirk through the blonde's mask. If you're a good girl I may give it back to you eventually. Conan glared at Naruto as she began to struggle even harder. Knowing it was futile, Naruto turned his attention back to his stew. Conan's struggle continued for half an hour before she realized that she would not be able to escape. Without her chakra she was as helpless as a civilian and the wire was bound too tightly for her to wiggle free. With nothing left to do, Conan merely stared up at the ceiling of the cave. About an hour later a delicious smell filled her nose. Turning her eyes she saw her blonde captor kneeling down next to her with a bowl of stew. Are you hungry? He asked, and when he received no answer he sighed. You know, not answering me only hurts yourself. I'm not hungry, Conan finally said, only for her stomach to betray her a second later. Despite the situation, Conan blushed in embarrassment. Naruto chuckled. So, hungry? He asked again with amusement evident in his voice. Not like I can eat anyway, in case you haven't noticed, Conan said sarcastically as she wiggled her arms which were currently tied to her body. That could be a problem, Naruto said, nodding in agreement and causing Conan to scowl at the amusement in his tone. And unfortunately I can't just untie you, as that would ruin the whole point of tying you up in the first place, aside from the fact that I don't trust you not to kill me the first chance you get. Thankfully I have a way around that. Conan eyed him wearily for a moment as she tried to find out what he meant. When she did, sent him a glare that would have melted lesser men. I won't be fed, least of all by you. Her stomach gurgled again and Naruto shrugged. If your pride means more to you than living, then be my guest and starve to death. Conan bit her lip as she felt her stomach going off again while Naruto moved to get up. Wait, she said. Naruto paused as he turned around. Yes. Conan paused as she swallowed the bit of pride she had as a kunoichi. Slumping her shoulders she spoke again. I would like that food, please. Naruto nodded as he went back to her. Kneeling down he tenderly picked her up and set her so. She was leaning against the wall. Going back he grabbed the bowl of stew before sitting next to her. Scooping up a spoonful of the food he lifted it to Conan's mouth. Conan opened her mouth without protest as Naruto brought the spoon inside her mouth before she closed it. The woman's eyes widened as the flavor of the food exploded on her tongue. While she did not want to admit it, the food was some of the best she had had in a long time. Strangely enough, she was reminded of Jiraiya and the times he would cook for her, Yahiko and Nagato, when the man had lived with them. As she ate the food she could not help but spare several glances at her captor. She could not tell his age, but from the sound of the voice he was fairly young, at least in his mid to late teens, and yet the way he walked and the confidence he exuded was the exact same aura she saw in most veteran shinobi that Akatsuki had. Would you like seconds? Her captor asked, and Conan found herself taken aback by the kindness and warmth in his voice. No thank you, she said, blinking as she wondered why she was being so polite to the person who had essentially taken her prisoner. She looked at him again as he went to clean out the bowl and sealed it and the food in a scroll. Finally she asked the question that had been burning in the back of her mind since she realized her situation. Why did you spare me? Naruto turned to look at her and tilted his head as he found himself slightly surprised by the question. Why did he spare her? She not only attacked him, but was also a part of Akatsuki, so by all rights he should just kill her and be done with it. And yet, shrugging, Naruto evaded the question. I'm not sure, to be honest. He looked up at the ceiling before looking back at her. Considering the group you're with, I probably should kill you. Conan instantly tensed, even though she knew if he wanted to kill her there was nothing she could do to stop him. Yet at the same time something tells me not to. Walking up to her he sat down and leaned against the wall. Conan watched the man as he closed his eyes. She was not sure what to make of that last comment. Most shinobi would have either killed her by now or at the very least raped her or something, yet he had done none of this and even treated her well. Deciding to get more information until she could make her escape, she asked him more questions. What do you plan to do with me? Naruto sighed as he ran a hand through his hair. You know, I haven't thought about it. Though I do know I'm not gonna let you go back to that crackpot you call a leader. Conan's eyes narrowed dangerously. Don't you dare talk about Pain-sama like that. Pain? Naruto said as if testing it. Is that what he calls himself these days? Conan's eyes instantly widened, wondering what this man knew about pain. Naruto looked over at her. I wonder, are you talking about Yahiko? He watched as her expression fell and realized with small pang of guilt that her friend was dead. However, that also left only one other option about Pain's identity, so. Nagato is Pain, eh? How do you know these things? Conan asked in a low and somewhat strained voice. She would not admit it, but being reminded of her dead friend hurt. Only a few people ever knew who we were, so how do you know this? Naruto hummed a second before speaking. I'm not sure I trust you enough to tell you. Maybe I will later though, if you earn my trust. Realizing she was not going to get anything out of the blonde, she stayed quiet. Eventually Conan began to feel tired and despite being in the presence of an enemy ended up falling asleep. Naruto looked over at Conan and gently lifted her up. Moving over to a sleeping bag, he unzipped it and tenderly set her in. Now that she was asleep, he took a small moment to study her. Conan had short light blue hair done up in a short shoulder-length cut with a small origami flower in it. Her face was perfectly heart-shaped and held a definitive feminine beauty that most women kunoichi or otherwise would be extremely hard-pressed to match. She also a labrae piercing under her bottom lip. Her skin was a milky white, and despite wearing the Akatsuki cloak, Naruto could easily see the feminine figure that rivaled Mei and Yugito's under it. He studied her face for a moment. Now that she was sleeping, her face looked innocent, peaceful and even slightly vulnerable, especially compared to the neutral or angry and annoyed looks she had given him when she had been awake. Resisting his natural urge to brush away a few strands of her hair, Naruto instead tucked her in and got out another sleeping bag from a scroll, laying in it where he went into a very light sleep. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Conan woke up the next morning the same way she had last time. The only difference was the absolutely heavenly aroma that seemed to penetrate her nose. She moved around a bit and frowned when she realized she was much warmer than she had been last night. Lifting her head, she saw that she had been moved into a sleeping bag. Good morning. Hearing the voice, Conan took her attention off of her situation. She turned to look at Naruto, who was currently over an open fire and had a pan in his hand. Breakfast will be in just a minute. Conan blinked as she saw the blonde flip something into the air and catch it back in the pan. A little while later he came up to her and sat down a plate piled with what looked like bread of some kind. Naruto unzipped the sleeping bag before picking Conan up, much to her protest, and propping her up against the wall. Do you want any butter on these? Conan blinked again as she fought to maintain a neutral expression. What are they? Naruto tilted his head to the side in a quizzical fashion before shrugging and decided to explain. It's called French toast. Apparently they're a foreign food of some kind, though I have no idea where they come from. So butter? He asked again. Conan merely shrugged, causing Naruto to sigh. I suppose we'll just try both ways then. Cutting piece of French toast off and sticking it with a fork, Naruto brought it to Conan's mouth. Said woman only hesitated for a second before taking it. Like last time, the food was easily the best she had ever tried, and did not hesitate the next time he brought the fork to her mouth. As Naruto continued feeding her, Conan tried to figure the blonde out. She had no clue why he was being so nice to her, even going so far as to give her food and placing her in a spare sleeping bag so she would not get cold during the night. Nor had he touched her inappropriately in any way. If he had, she would have noticed, since there were always ways to tell when someone had done something to her, such as her clothing being ruffled or even removed entirely. Unfortunately, she could not come up with any explanation that may shed some light the blonde man's strange behavior. It was most vexing to say the least. Aren't you going to eat? Conan asked after she finished swallowing a bite of food, since while she did not care about the man, she had yet to see him have any food and she had to wonder if he had possibly poisoned the food, though she could not think of a reason why he would. Naruto let out a small chuckle. I already ate this morning before you woke up, but thank you for the concern. Conan let out a humph, but continued to eat. When she finished, Naruto went about cleaning the dishes and getting rid of any evidence of him being there. Looking back over at Conan, he sighed. Moving back to her, he sat down as Conan watched him. For a while neither spoke as the two tried to come up with an answer to their thoughts, though both were thinking completely different things. Why do you do it? Naruto finally asked, as he figured beating around the bush would not help anything, nor get him the answers he sought. Why do I do what? Conan replied as she answered his question with another question. Why do you follow Nagato? Naruto asked. I mean, I know he's your friend and all, but really the guy's obviously gone mad. Conan snarled as she tried to lunge at him only to fall on her face. Don't you dare speak of him that way. You know nothing about him, or the pain he's been through. Someone like you could never understand. Someone like me, huh? Naruto asked with sarcasm. Well, that's good, because frankly I wouldn't want to understand some megalomaniac with the desire and ability to kill people without remorse, all for the sake of power. Conan began struggling more as this man insulted her one reason left for living. Shut up. You know nothing. He's doing this to create peace. Peace? Naruto questioned as his incredulous tone turned into anger as her comment got the better of him. How can trying to capture the Biju ever create peace? How could gaining that kind of power bring us peace? You think that by killing off the few people who truly understand what it means to suffer that pain will bring peace? You are either a fool or very naive if you could even think holding such power would bring any kind of peace except the peace of the grave. You're wrong. Conan huffed as she stopped struggling, having exhausted herself. He is going to bring true peace. Oh. Naruto questioned, his tone changing from angry to curious. And what has your leader done to help bring about this peace? Naruto asked. For a moment Conan was stumped. What had Pain done to help bring peace? For a moment her mind shut down as she tried and failed to find something. However, she quickly shook it off as the blonde trying to get her to question her beliefs and faith in her friend. He defeated Hanzo and freed Megakure, she stated with conviction. I see, Naruto said as he nodded his head, and what else has he done? Surely a man who would be so honorable as to free a village would have done something else. He looked over at Conan, who had gone silent. What has he done to help your people? Naruto asked. What about all the war orphans who became homeless due to your friend's rebellion? Did he try to help them? Or perhaps he helped to rebuild AIM and the homes that were destroyed? When Conan didn't answer, Naruto nodded. I'll tell you what he did, it was nothing. Your leader did nothing to help AIM's people. Instead, he spends his days trying to gain power. He tries to find ways to capture the Jinchuriki and kill them for his own misguided goals, while his own people suffer. You're wrong. Conan stated in a strained voice and shook her head as she refused to believe what Naruto was telling her. There was no way what he said was true. Pain was trying to bring peace to the world, right? Naruto, seeing the young woman in obvious denial, walked over to her and hauled her to her feet. Lifting her up, he carried her over his shoulder. What are you doing? Put me down now. Conan yelled as she was unable to do anything else. No can do, Naruto said as the woman started to struggle. He created a cage cushion that stuck a silencing seal over her mouth. There is something you need to see. Now then, please do me a favor and shut up. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto found himself walking through the streets of AIM far sooner than he had expected to. Again, he had his cloaking jutsu on as he carried the young woman through a mostly deserted street. Thankfully the rain jutsu was not on, or Naruto would have been forced to use more caution. It was a good thing Naruto had been able to find out that the jutsu had a weakness. The blonde had learned that Nagato could only keep the jutsu going for 12 hours before he had to stop for another 6. Naruto did not know why it was this way, but figured that the jutsu had some kind of cost chakra or otherwise that stopped Pain from constantly using it. He looked over his shoulder at Conan to see her glaring at him, before shrugging said glare off. At least she was no longer trying to break out of his grip anymore. Finally finding where he was looking for, he set Conan down against a wall. Leaning down, he grabbed the seal and pulled it off her mouth. You're lucky I can't do anything to you right now. Conan growled out as she glared at him with a look that Naruto was sure could have killed other men. Hell, I'm sure Jiraiya would have died under such a glare, he thought with some amusement. Naruto gave her an uncaring shrug as he stood up and pointed just a little ways away. Tell me what you see. Conan frowned as she looked towards where he was pointing. It was a city block of a Megakure that she did not recognize, or at least it had been. The entire area was completely destroyed, with a large crater in the middle that held the metal buildings of AIM in them, sticking out making it look like a graveyard city. However, she could not be 100% sure in her guess. The only reason she was even able to tell it was a part of AIM was because of the fact that she knew they were still in the village and the few pieces of debris and buildings sticking out of the ground in the area were AIM-style buildings. I don't know, what am I looking at? She finally asked as she decided to humor him. This place used to be a living district, Naruto said, along with 13 other sectors. Nearly 75% of a megacore used to live there. This place along with 7 others are nothing more than ruins now. Conan's eyes widened as she looked out over the devastation. When had this happened? She looked out at the destruction as she tried to remember what had happened to cause such devastation. Her mind, however, drew blanks as she could not for the life of her remember what happened. Do you know how this place was destroyed? Naruto asked as he looked at Conan with his piercing blue eyes. Conan shook her head and Naruto decided to tell her. This was where your friend Nagato took out his revenge on Hanzo the salamander after he killed him. He looked over at Conan to see her gaining a confused look. This residence was where Hasno's family lived. Do you know what happened to them? The question was rhetorical. He knew Conan knew what had happened to the man's family. They were killed and Pain decided to leave this place as a testament to those that would oppose him. Naruto said, I hear that Hanzo had a wife and a 4-year-old granddaughter. Nagato killed them without remorse and without regret, but you already knew that, didn't you? Conan grit her teeth as she tried to justify Nagato's actions. She went through several counter-arguments in her mind to help her deny what the blonde-haired man was saying. Yet everything she tried to think of, everything she wanted to say sounded hollow to her ears as she looked at the devastation. Did you know that this was not the only place where your friend exacted his revenge? Naruto asked in a quiet voice. Of the 13 other living sectors, 6 of them were destroyed the same as this one. Anybody who Nagato even suspected of being even remotely loyal to Hanzo was killed along with their families. He didn't care whether they were truly loyal, just afraid to stand up to Hanzo, or even were unfortunate enough to be caught in the crossfire. All of them were killed in Pain's quest for revenge. Naruto looked over at Conan. When he heard a small sob, he turned to see the beautiful blue-haired woman choking back tears as she tried to struggle against the idea that her friend could do such a thing. Naruto held in a wince. He never liked to hurt a woman, be it physically or mentally. The blonde shinobi was not sure if it was some kind of chivalrous nature or just that he could never stand to see others hurting, but it was always hurt to see a woman cry. He walked up to her and kneeled in front of her. Conan slowly reeled in her tears as she looked at him. I have one more place I want to show you, Naruto said, and Conan was once again taken aback by the compassionate nature of his voice. If I release your bindings, will you promise to do as I say? He asked as he looked at her with those eyes that seemed to look straight through her and into her very soul. Conan was truly compelled to say no, not just because he was supposed to be her enemy but also because she was afraid. Her faith in Nagato had taken a large hit today and Conan was afraid that what this man had to show her would irrevocably shatter any confidence she had in the man she considered family. Yet for some reason she felt compelled to place her trust in this boy, no man, she corrected herself. She felt a desire to place her faith in this man who, even though she had only known him for a little while, was starting to remind her so much of her departed friend Yahiko. I promise, she said at last as she decided to place her trust in the person who had captured her yesterday. Naruto nodded as he undid her bindings and made her put her Akatsuki cloak in a seal, leaving Conan in a set of clothes that did nothing to hide her amazing figure. She was wearing a pair of black skin-tight leather pants that showed off curvaceous and amazingly toned and beautiful legs, as well as a sleeveless skin-tight shirt that covered just her neck and a little under 2/3 RDS of her C borderline D-cup chest, leaving the outer edge of her chest, torso and shoulders bare. The shirt also had a diamond cut in the center just below her collarbone and a V-cut on the bottom where the shirt split down the center and moved off to fall down to the sides, allowing Naruto a glimpse of her toned stomach which had 4 piercings around her belly button. Naruto mentally swore as he looked away with a blush and tried to get the image out of his head. Placing the invisibility jutsu over himself, Naruto grabbed Conan's hand to activate the invisibility jutsu over her too. Conan was startled as she felt Naruto's hand grabbed hers, not just at the contact but also at the odd feeling of familiarity it gave, or was it comfort she felt? As she walked with the blonde shinobi, Conan noticed that he was leading her farther and farther away from the center of town, Looking over, she saw that he was heading towards the outskirts of the area that Nagato had attacked when he gained entrance into aim to fight Hanzo. When they got there, she noticed with some surprise that there was a cottage at their destination. It was made out of steel and looked fairly new, mainly from the fact that it was not only different from any of the buildings found in AIM but also because this area had been nearly destroyed by Nagato's assault and none of the buildings aside from that small cottage stood. However, what really surprised her were the small group of kids who were currently playing with a ball. There were 3 of them, 2 boys and 1 girl. The 3 stopped playing as they looked over at Naruto as he dropped the invisibility jutsu. If Conan had been surprised before, she became absolutely shocked when the 3 gave a shout of, "Oni-chan," and rushed over to Naruto. The 3 soon surrounded the 2 of them and began firing off questions at Naruto, said Blonde just laughed as he lifted the 3 of them up, placing the girl on his shoulders while the 2 boys were in each of his arms. Now that she got a closer look, Conan noticed that they could not be much older than 7 or 8 years old. "I thought you were leaving, Oni-chan," said the boy on the left, a kid with messy black hair and green eyes. "Hey Oni-chan, who's the pretty Oni-chan you brought with you?" asked the boy on Naruto's right arm. He had dark blue hair and brown eyes. "Is she your girlfriend?" The girl with dark green hair and blue eyes as she leaned on his head asked with a giggle as she held up her pinky. Conan was hit with a wave of nostalgia as she watched the blonde interacting with the young kids, though she blushed at the compliment and question that were thrown at Naruto concerning her. It was in a way so much like how she, Nagato and Yahiko had been found by Jiraiya-sensei all those years ago. For a few minutes she zoned out before being brought back when she heard a squeal of delight. Looking towards the source, it was to see all of the kids on a clone of Naruto as they headed into the house. "I found those 3 kids scrounging around a garbage can when I was trying to find information on Akatsuki here," Naruto said as he saw Conan look over towards him with a questioning gaze. "Do you know what they told me their dream is?" he asked Conan as he looked towards the cottage. Conan shook her head. "No. They said they wanted to lead a rebellion to free AIM," Naruto said as Conan gasped in shock. "Those 3 kids were the only ones to escape from Nagato's revenge. Apparently their parents had them hide in a secret cellar before they were killed. Is this familiar to you?" "It's almost just like Nagato, Yahiko and I when we were younger," Conan said as she saw the similarities between her old group and the 3 she had just met. They even had plans to free AIM like Yahiko had come up with after Jiraiya-sensei had left, only this time it was against pain rather than when she and her friends had been facing Hanzo. These kids were living like they had and she knew that it was because of her and pain that they were. She felt tears begin to fall down her eyes as she realized she was no longer able to hide the truth she had denied to herself. With the startling knowledge that Nagato had lost his way when he took up the name Pain and became blind by a lust for power and the belief that he was God, her faith in him shattered. Falling to her knees, Conan began to cry in earnest. Without her faith in Pain, who had become her reason to live, she felt even more empty than after Yahiko had died. Naruto watched as the woman wept and could not help the feeling of regret that encompassed him. Despite knowing that she had to cast off the illusions she put up for herself, Naruto still found it hurt him to see a woman cry. "Curse my conscience," Naruto said to himself as he closed the distance between them and knelt down. Conan was startled when she felt a pair of arms engulf her torso. Feeling herself being pulled into an embrace as a warm feeling encompassed her, she instantly moved towards the small source of comfort she found. Pressing her head into a shirt, she let out all of the pain and loneliness she had been feeling since Yahiko's death. After the death of cheerful boy who tried to act tough and be their leader had died, Nagato had never been the same. He had started to become colder and colder with each passing day, so much so that Conan had to put up a wall around her emotions, a wall that had just broke. Conan gripped the cloth of the shirt she had buried her head into as she continued to let her tears fall unabashed down her face. She felt a hand start to make soothing motions as it rubbed her back and a voice whispered in her ear, "It's all right." Looking up, she saw none other than the blonde who had captured her and destroyed her faith in the one person she had left in the world. The same blonde who had also, in the short time she had known him, reminded her of Yahiko and shown her a compassion she would have never expected from someone who was supposed to be an enemy. She looked into his eyes, trying to understand why he was doing these things, why he would strip away her beliefs, yet at the same time why he was so nice to her despite them being enemies. It took a while. Eventually she saw something she had not expected to see. Pain. The young man's eyes were pools of pain and loneliness that she had not even seen in Nagato's or her own eyes. This boy, she realized, understood pain even better than she did, yet even then Conan could see that he still held onto his compassionate and caring nature. Who are you? She asked even as tears continued to fall down her face. Naruto brought a hand to Conan's face and gently brushed away a few tears. I'm someone who understands pain. Bringing his face up to his mask, he slowly pulled it down, revealing 6 whisker marks on his face. Conan's eyes widened in recognition. While she had never met the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, she had been given a general description. To think that this entire time she was with one of the people they had been trying to kill. I am also a student of Jiraiya's, like you. That was how you knew who I was. Conan breathed as she finally figured out how he knew of her and Nagato. Naruto nodded. Jiraiya-sensei told me the story of how he met you three. Naruto said, figuring it would be best to use his sensei's real name instead of his nickname for the man. He had told me that he was going to get you three after the war and take you to Konoha with him, but received information you had been killed. Naruto shrugged. To be honest, I wasn't even sure it was you until I mentioned Nagato and Yahiko. All I had was your general description that gave me a hunch. Conan felt lightheaded as she tried to wrap her mind around all the startling revelations today. It was all too much to handle in too short a time. It almost seemed like some kind of divine intervention from a real god. To think that the man before her was not only the Kyuubi Jinchuriki but also that he was a student of Jiraiya's as well. Then he comes here and meets her, showing her that pain was not what she had thought he was. It was almost enough to make one believe in fate. She was brought back to the real world when she felt a hand cup her cheek. Looking up, she followed the arm to see Naruto with a concerned expression on his face. Are you alright? He asked. Conan paused as she realized she was not alright. Not really, this is all too much to take in. Naruto nodded in understanding. Well then, how about you don't think about it for now? Naruto stood up, lifting Conan, who was still in his arms, into a bridal carry. How about we go inside and you can help me entertain the kids while I make some food, Naruto suggested with a smile. Conan, while surprised, did not decline the idea as Naruto set her down and followed the blonde shinobi inside. The two of them spent the rest of the day with the kids. As a clone of Naruto made food, Conan and the real Naruto would spend their time entertaining the children. Naruto by telling them grand stories of all the places he had been to, and Conan by teaching the little girl origami. Naruto had also tried his hand at the art, but after several dozen paper cuts had given up, much to Conan's secret amusement. As the day wore on, Conan was once again struck by the similarities of her own life, but this time they did not seem to hurt as much, and Naruto had even gotten the woman to smile with a terrible joke he told. Eventually the three children passed out and Naruto and Conan put them to bed before the two found themselves sitting on a couch and looking outside at the rain, which had started up again. I guess I'm going to be here for 12 hours again, Naruto said to himself. Well, he could just flash away, but he would want to say goodbye to the kids. He looked over at what was she now? He wondered, since she was not really his prisoner anymore. Acquaintance. Companion. Friend. He was unsure but supposed it didn't really matter anymore. What will you do now, Conan? Asked Naruto. Conan looked at him and sighed as she closed her eyes. I don't know anymore, she said in a soft voice. Nagato had been everything to me, and now that I don't feel I can follow him. You could come with me if you want. She looked up at Naruto in shock as he continued to speak. I'll take you to Konoha and you can stay with me. I'll do what I can to give you a happy life, if you want one with me, that is, he finished with a sheepish expression. Conan actually smiled at the look she had often seen on Yahiko's face. Thank you, but I don't think that's a good idea, at least not right now. If I went with you, Pain would get suspicious, and if he found out I have left Akatsuki, I have no doubt he would try to kill me. Well, yeah, but he would have to get past me, Naruto said as he puffed out his chest confidently. You would protect me? Conan asked, somewhat amused and somewhat shocked. Of course I would, Naruto said. If you came with me, that would make you one of my precious people, and I always protect my precious people. Conan smiled as she wiped an errant tear from her eye. Thinking for a moment, she looked back at Naruto. I still think it's too dangerous. Right now, even as strong as you are, it will not be enough to defeat Pain. Naruto winced, knowing that at the moment it was probably true, but if you wanted me to, I could spy on Akatsuki for you. That got Naruto's attention. Having a spy within Akatsuki would be the biggest boon ever, but That's pretty dangerous, Conan-chan, Naruto said, not even realizing the affectionate suffix he added, though Conan did as she gave a small blush. Not only is it dangerous, but you would have to hide your intentions from someone you admitted to me meant the world to you. I myself would not want to do that, and I certainly wouldn't wish it on you. Thank you for your concern, she said as she unknowingly used the same words he had said to her this morning. But I want to do this, you were right about him. Nagato has been dead for a long time, he is now pain and I don't think he can be saved. Naruto leaned over and wiped an errant tear that threatened to fall from Conan's eye. If this is what you want, I won't stop you. Just promise me you will be careful. I will, Conan promised, a little surprised at the concern in his voice. Also, do you think you could occasionally visit these kids? They don't have anyone else, and while I'll try to visit as much as I can. Don't worry, Conan interrupted with a smile, I'll look after them for you. Thank you, Naruto said. For the rest of the night the two sat on the couch. Eventually they both fell asleep with Conan using Naruto's chest as a pillow. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. The next morning the two woke up to find themselves in a very compromising position. Conan was situated between Naruto's legs with her head on his chest while one hand had somehow managed to slip under his shirt and was resting on his muscular pectorals. Meanwhile Naruto had one hand wrapped around her waist, which wasn't bad, however his other hand was currently inside Conan's pants and was resting on what Naruto recognized as a very fine ass. To make matters worse for both of them, Naruto currently had a morning stiffy. As the two sported similar blushes on their face, Conan shifted a bit, causing her to rub against Naruto's increasingly enlarged member. The blue-haired woman became positively mortified when she felt a low moan escape her throat as his length rubbed against her inner thigh, with a speed that would have made the former Senku proud and definitely impressed the current one. Conan shot off of him and sat at the edge of the couch. For a long while neither of the two said anything, nor could they even look at each other. Eventually Naruto coughed. Listen, I'm gonna go take a shower, a very cold shower. Do you think you could start breakfast for the kids? Conan looked at him for a second before blushing and averting her eyes. Unable to actually speak, the blue-haired woman merely settled for nodding. Naruto got up and went to the small bathroom in the cottage. Meanwhile Conan went to the kitchen and began to prepare breakfast. After a cold shower to get himself under control, Naruto came into the kitchen and helped prepare breakfast. Thankfully most of the lingering embarrassment that hung in the air was for the most part gone as the two worked in silence. A little while later the three kids woke up and stormed into the kitchen, chattering to Naruto and Conan in an excited fashion. It took a while, but they were eventually able to get the kids to settle down enough to eat their food. After that they spent their time telling the kids stories. Several hours later the rain eventually cleared, making it safe for Naruto to leave, much to the children's disappointment. Do you have to go? The three kids asked at the same time. Naruto smiled as he kneeled down so he was eye level with them. Yes, unfortunately, there are a lot of things I need to do and I can't do them here. He looked at each of them and noticed that the girl looked like she was about to cry. He moved his hand up and gently brushed away the small moisture in her eyes. Hey, now there's no need for tears, Naruto said with a smile. This won't be the last time you see me. Remember, with that seal in your house I can come and visit you guys anytime, so no crying, okay? The little girl gave a small nod before throwing herself at Naruto. Said Blonde wrapped the girl up in a hug as he rubbed her hair and whispered soothing words to the little girl. They broke away a little later and Naruto stood up and looked at the three of them. Now do you three remember what I told you? True strength only comes from protecting someone precious to you, the three said in unison, causing Naruto to smile. Good, Naruto said. I want you to remember that and make sure to protect and look after each other. Can you do that? He received three nods and smiled. Alright then, we'll see you later. He and Conan made their way outside and left the small cottage. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. You're later than I expected you to be, Pain said as Conan walked onto the ledge, not even bothering to turn and face her. He was a stronger opponent than I expected, Conan stated in her emotionless voice. Pain turned around to look at her and saw that she did indeed look a little roughed up. Her Akatsuki cloak was ripped in several places and he could see a few scars here and there denoting to where she had been cut. Turning around he put it out of his mind. So long as whoever had come into aim was dead it did not matter. Very well, Pain said, giving Conan a clear dismissal. Bowing slightly Conan left, walking through the office and into the hall. Eventually she reached a door and went inside. Looking around at her sparsely furnished room, she sighed and walked into her bedroom. Throwing her cloak on the floor, she fell onto her bed as she decided to get some sleep. As she closed her eyes, her hand went up to clutch a necklace, more specifically the tri-pronged kunai attached to it. As she closed her eyes and went to sleep. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXX Naruto sighed in relief as he flopped onto the bed in his hotel. It had been about 2 weeks since he had gotten out of AIM, and this was the first time he had been able to rest in a bed since then. Opening his eyes, Naruto stared at the ceiling and thought. He was going to meet up with Jiraiya again next month, having received a message that they were going to go on a mission together. What it was he didn't know, but was looking forward to doing an actual mission with his sensei. Even though he had trained with the man for nearly 3 years now, they had never done a mission together. He absently wondered if he should tell his sensei about what he had found. Shaking his head, Naruto decided against it for now. If Jiraiya knew that his 2 students were alive, he would not doubt go to AIM and Nagato would kill him. For now he would keep this a secret between him and Konan. Naruto was knocked from his thoughts when he felt the new chakra recognition seal he had added to the Hiraishin Kunai pulse. Sitting up, Naruto began to concentrate as he felt out the sister seal to the one on his kunai. The seal was an alert for him to use the Hiraishin's ability to teleport other objects and people through the use of his chakra. His father Minato had also had the ability to teleport and warp other people and objects. To use this ability, one had to have 2 kunai that would connect through the use of a specific set of hand seals, and depending on the size and distance determined how much chakra one had to use to warp the person or thing that was touching the other kunai. Taking his tri-pronged kunai in between his fingers, Naruto went through a series of hand seals and began to pull on the kunai whose pulse he felt. Suddenly Konan appeared right in front of him, looking confused and slightly disoriented as she held the kunai loosely in her hands. Her eyes then focused on Naruto and a small, almost imperceptible smile came to her face. If someone had told her that she would miss a man she had met only 2 weeks ago and originally been her enemy, she would have told them they were mad before slicing their throat with her paper blades. But she could not deny that she had missed the blonde ninja. She found it odd that she could miss someone after only knowing them for a short time. But after he had broken through her emotional barrier, she had felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders, and the time she had spent with him and the kids had been some of the best she had in years, reminding her of the times Jiraiya had lived with her, Nagato and Yahiko. Naruto. Konan said in her soft and feminine voice as she gave him a small nod. Naruto grinned at the woman. Konan-chan, was there something you needed, or did you need to tell me something? I felt that it would be prudent to inform you of Pain's abilities, Konan said. We did not get the chance to do that when I met you, and it would be a good idea if you knew what you were up against. Naruto nodded and patted the spot next to him. Nodding, Konan moved over to him and sat down on the bed as she began to explain Pain's power. The more Konan spoke of Pain, the more Naruto felt that he was being drawn into the realm of myth. He had of course knew that the man possessed the Renegan, which was the first and most powerful of the 3 great Dujutsus and the only transcended bloodline in known existence. But he had not known what all of that entailed exactly. Apparently someone with the Renegan had the ability to use all 5 of the main elements and the 6th element of gravity. But what was truly astounding was how Pain was able to manipulate dead bodies that he possessed through the use of chakra transmitters. Pain had 6 bodies under his control. The God realm, which Konan told Naruto was originally her friend Yahiko's body, which had the ability to use the Renegan's gravity techniques. With it he could push and pull objects away from him. He was also the one who could use ninjutsu. The human realm was able to pull a person's soul from his or her body and read minds. This one was also fast and primarily used taijutsu. His ghost realm path had the ability to absorb any type of ninjutsu attack. The demon realm was able to use a tail and held a number of powerful explosives and missiles it could launch. Animal realm path could summon large creatures to fight for him, as well as the other paths through the use of a space-time ninjutsu. The hell realm path had the ability to summon a demon to do his bidding. This one also had the ability to bring the other paths back to life. Naruto sighed as he leaned back on his hands and tried to wrap his mind around the powers that Pain possessed. The blonde could now see why the man called himself a god. With powers like his, it was easy to see that the man could very well be one. Fighting him would be extremely hard, and Naruto knew he might not be able to defeat the man as he was now. That's a lot to take in, Naruto said slowly. Konan actually felt a smirk come to her face. Now you know I felt 2 weeks ago. Naruto laughed. I suppose I do, though mine is more of a feeling of being overwhelmed. They quieted down for a moment and sat together in comfortable silence. Hey Conan-chan, Naruto said as he looked at her, would you like to go get lunch with me? Conan blinked. Lunch. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Conan finished ordering her food at the small restaurant they had entered. She had never been to a restaurant before. When she had been an orphan, she had not even lived in a city, so she never got the chance to eat out, and after the war she had not had the time as she ran around doing Nagato's bidding. The restaurant was pretty nice by her standards. The building had several booths and tables situated inside. The booths had soft red cushions on them and the tables had a small candle on it. There was soft music floating through the air, coming from a person who was sitting in a corner of the restaurant playing with a junonajin, a 17-string instrument called a zither. Conan looked over at Naruto to see him with his eyes closed humming a small tune in time with the music. Naruto, she spoke up, getting his attention. Why did you take me here? She asked in an unsure tone. It had been on her mind since he had asked her to have lunch with him. She had never had someone take her anywhere even remotely nice and was not sure why he was doing this for her. Do I need a reason to want to take you somewhere nice? Naruto asked as he tilted his head to the side, opened his eyes to look at her with an expression of slight confusion adorning his face. Well, I guess not. Conan looked down at the table. I was just curious. You've never done anything like this, huh? Naruto asked in a quiet tone, getting a nod to his question. Then that gives me all the more reason to do this for you. Conan snapped. Her head snapped towards the blonde shinobi as he grinned. Since you have not been able to enjoy the pleasures life has to offer, it gives me all the more reason to make sure that you learn to have fun. Fun. Conan stated in a soft tone. She had not been able to have fun for a long time. Spending time with Naruto and the orphans in AIM had been the most fun she had had for a while, the most fun in quite a few years in fact. Between the trying to survive as an orphan, fighting in a war and running around doing Pain's bidding, she had not been able to have fun of any kind for nearly a dozen years. She looked around at the nice restaurant again before shifting her gaze over to Naruto. As she looked at the blonde, she felt a small amount of heat rise to her cheeks. I wonder if this is a date. Conan asked herself as she looked around at the other tables. She had never been on a date before. Though she had read a little about them in the few romance novels she kept, this certainly felt like a date with the casual yet somewhat romantic atmosphere. Does that mean he likes me? Or maybe he just finds me physically attractive? While Conan was not vain, she knew she considered beautiful by most standards. Some of the missions she had done both during the war and for Pain afterwards had her using seduction techniques to assassinate her enemies. The food soon arrived and she tried not to think about the questions she felt as she began to eat. The meal itself was a quiet affair. Conan would occasionally throw glances at Naruto, who was eating peacefully and seemingly unaware of her looks. In truth, he knew Conan is throwing him unsure glances, but did not feel that teasing her like he would normally do was a good idea right now. After dinner, Naruto took Conan out to walk around the town, hoping to get her to experience a life without fighting for a little while. Conan looked around at all the people walking and talking in surprise. The place was so peaceful compared to what she knew. She looked as couples walked hand in hand as they looked in the windows of various shops. Parents were walking with their children and occasionally buying them treats. She felt a small pang of sadness at having never had the chance to experience any of these things after her parents died when she was young. The part of her that had started to come out since meeting Naruto would have jumped at the chance to experience a normal life. She was shaking out of her thoughts when she felt an arm wrap around her shoulder. Stopping, she turned her head. She saw Naruto looking at her with a concerned expression. Hey, are you alright? Naruto asked with a little concern in his voice. Conan nodded. Yes, I'm just not used to this. She gestured towards all the people around her. Naruto smiled. We'll just have to make sure you become acclimated to it. Naruto said as he grabbed her hand and began to pull her around the village. Naruto took her to all of the different kinds of shops, places such as sweet shops, souvenir stores and clothing stores. Conan found that she was actually enjoying herself as they went around to all the different places Naruto took her to. By the end of the day, Conan had a genuine smile on her face as they went back to Naruto's room. Thank you for taking me out to dinner, Conan said with a small bow as she tried to hide the pink on her cheeks. Naruto gave a sheepish grin as he rubbed the back of his head. You don't have to thank me, you know. I wanted to take you out. In fact, I was wondering if you would like to do it again the next time we meet. Conan looked up at Naruto to see he had a light blush on his face as he averted his eyes. I would like that, she said with a soft smile. Naruto gave her his foxy grin. Then it's a date. Before Conan could reply, Naruto focused his chakra into her kunai. In less than a second, the young woman found herself in her room right next to the paper seal Naruto had told her to put in her room. A date. Conan felt her cheeks heat up at the thought of going on a date with the young man. She found herself looking forward to meeting Naruto again and going on that date with him. XXXXXXXXXXXXX 3 months later. For the next 3 months Naruto would use the Hiraishin to summon Conan when he was not with Jiraiya. She would give a report on what was going on with Akatsuki and then Naruto would take her out to do something fun. Letting Conan try out all of the activities and other such things she had missed in her life, whether it was going to a movie, having a picnic or taking her shopping for clothes. Not that he didn't love the skin-tight bodysuit she always had on, but he would always end up needing a cold shower after she left when she wore that. The fact that she continued to wear it even after they bought her clothes made him think she knew what it was doing to him and wanted to tease him, though it was hard to tell since she for the most part still kept a neutral expression except for the few occasions he caught her smiling. After the first 3 weeks Conan and Naruto began to see each other more frequently, having started to grow closer together. Whenever Naruto was with Jiraiya he would often ditch the white-haired senin at some pub or whorehouse and summon the blue-haired woman. The two would usually go out to dinner or take long walks around or outside of whatever town Naruto was staying in. As she continued to get to know him, Conan began to open up to the blonde a bit more. She began to tell him stories of when she was a little girl. Most of her stories involved Yahiko and the things he had done for her. She told the blonde of how they had met and later found Nagato and had him join their group. She spoke of how Yahiko had declared that he would become a god and end the fighting in Omegakure, as well as stop the rain which Yahiko had likened to the people's tears. She talked about how they had met Jiraiya and he later taught them how to be ninja, staying with them for several months. After Jiraiya left them, the 3 AIM orphans had began to gain a reputation and other comrades who held the same belief as them. Using their growing power they had spread their beliefs that war should be stopped without violence. However, that was when they had become a threat to Hanzo, the leader of Omegakure, who much to Naruto's extreme displeasure had struck a deal with Danzo Shimura to help deal with the 3. Conan had confided to Naruto about how she had been captured and Nagato was forced to choose between having Hanzo kill Conan, or killing Yahiko himself. The blue-haired woman told Naruto how Yahiko had thrown himself on Nagato's kunai and told Nagato to continue their mission to find peace. When Naruto had asked her why she trusted to tell him this, her actions and answer afterwards had shocked him. Conan had quite literally thrown herself on top of him and began to cry. The beautiful blue-haired woman told the blonde how he reminded her so much of Yahiko, both in personality and personal philosophy. Yahiko, like Naruto, had desired to become the leader of his village. He had that never give up attitude that Naruto, despite maturing greatly, had never lost. Also, like Naruto, Yahiko had the desire to become strong enough to protect Conan and Nagato, much like how the blonde shinobi was with his own friends. Naruto realized that he reminded her so much of her old friend that it was almost like she was with Yahiko whenever she spent time with him. When Naruto commented on this, Conan said that she felt as if Naruto was carrying on the dreams of Yahiko instead of pain. She had also confessed that when they were younger Conan had something of a crush on Yahiko, who had become their leader when they were orphans and even afterwards when they began their journey to bring peace to AIM. Deciding that because Conan had trusted him with what he knew was her most painful memory, he should trust her as well, Naruto began to tell her about his pain. How he had been hated for his whole life because his own father sealed the kyuubi inside of him, the abuse and malnourishment he had suffered in the orphanage. Being kicked out of said orphanage at the age of 4, where he was forced to live on the street for a year before the Hokage had found him and given him an apartment. He told her how the people of his village always looked at him with hate-filled eyes, telling their kids to stay away from him because he was a monster, and how the parents' hate was eventually passed on to their children. Conan was horrified to know just how painful his life was. Sure, she had been an orphan, but she always had Yahiko or Nagato when she was growing up, and she had never been hated. Naruto had no one. Even worse was that while it only happened a few times, Naruto would occasionally get severe beatings by several mobs on his birthday, which was the same day the Kyuubi had attacked Konoha and been sealed into Naruto. The blonde's only saving grace in the whole village had been the Sandaime Hokage, a few of his Anbu and a small ramen stand who did not hold any prejudice against Naruto and treated him like a human being. It was then that Konan felt her respect and feelings for Naruto grow even stronger. The two were currently sitting under a tree near a small beautiful lake with crystal clear water. As she watched the waves roll up and caress the shore, Konan gave a smile as she thought about how her life had become a lot less bleak. She looked over at Naruto, who was leaning his back against the tree with his hands behind his head. His eyes were closed and he had a small smile on his face. The peaceful look and feeling he gave off caused her smile to widen. She had spent quite a bit of time with Naruto in the last 3 months. Konan had thought about the blonde often nowadays. Even when he was not with her, Naruto would often worm his way into her thoughts. Whenever her thoughts wandered over to the blonde, it made her think of the feelings she had for Yahiko. The desire she had to be with Yahiko had slowly been transferring over to Naruto. Konan didn't even bother to think about how or when this had started happening and instead decided to just accept it. If there was one thing in her life she had learned when living as an orphan, it was not to look a gift horse in the mouth. Being a bit bolder than usual, Konan scooted herself closer to the young blonde and closing her eyes leaned against him whilst laying her head on his shoulder. Naruto opened his eyes and looked down at her in surprise. Ah. Kona-chan, what are you doing? He asked in a confused voice. I want to be near you. Konan opened her eyes to look at him. Do you not like me being this close to you? Naruto relaxed as he wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her closer. Not at all, I was just startled. But are you sure you're okay with this? As I mean, you do know that I will have to rebuild my clan. Naruto had told Konan about this little bit of information a while ago, along with the fact that he had 3 women he was currently secretly engaged to, since he did not want anyone coming after them until he felt he was strong enough to protect them. I know, Konan said in a voice that was just above a whisper. I don't care about that so long as I can be with you. Naruto looked startled as Konan lifted her head off his shoulders and looked at him. There was only one person I ever thought I would love. After Yahiko died, I didn't think I would ever get to find someone like that again. She gave him a large smile. But you showed me something when I had nothing but the desire to follow the dreams of a man who lost sight of his goals and became corrupted by power and a madman. Naruto knew who she was talking about. Aside from telling him about Pain and the others, she also told Naruto about the true leader of Akatsuki, Madara Uchiha. Apparently the old Uchiha leader was not as dead as everyone had been led to believe. The man had not only survived his fight with Hashirama Senju but also had found immortality. Madara had been living all these years, and when he saw the chance created Akatsuki, he used Nagato's desire for peace, warping and twisting it until there was nothing left but a man with delusions of grandeur. And even though Kyuubi refused to talk to him about it, Naruto was positive that Madara was the one responsible for its attack on Konoha at the day of his birth. After I met you, I found something I had lost, Konan continued in her soft voice, something I had not felt since Yahiko. The desire to be with someone and feel loved and hope that maybe you can find a way to do what others couldn't. Naruto frowned. Are you replacing me with Yahiko? No, of course not. Konan said in a shocked voice as her eyes widened. While I admit the similarities between you two are close enough that you could almost be his brother, I know you are your own person. But you bring out the sides of me that only Yahiko could, that's why I want to be with you. Naruto stared at the woman who basically just confessed her love for him. Konan may not have said it, but Naruto had figured out woman enough to read between the lines of what they were saying to know what they meant. Nor had he detected a lie from her, so he knew everything she said was in fact true. Smiling, Naruto gently cupped her cheek with one of his hands, caressing it in a tender fashion. Konan closed her eyes as she leaned into his touch, and Naruto imagined that she would start purring any second now. Thank you for being honest with me, Naruto said, and gave the woman a smile as she opened her beautiful amber-colored eyes to look at him. I won't deny that after our first encounter I began to gain feelings for you too, Naruto said as Konan giggled, remembering their disastrous first encounter. So if you're okay with knowing I will have to marry multiple women, I would like to give us a chance. Konan's breath hitched as Naruto began to lean down, his hand going from her cheek to below her chin as he gently lifted her head to meet his. She slowly closed her eyes as Naruto's face came closer so she didn't see when their lips met, but she did feel it, and when it happened Conan felt a small jolt run through her body. Conan wrapped her arms around Naruto as she leaned into the kiss. Naruto did likewise as he wrapped his arms around her waist, shifting Conan's position so she was on lap. At the first the kiss was chaste and light, merely applying a bit of pressure against each other before Naruto gently took her bottom lip and suckled on it. Conan let out a soft moan as the pressure from Naruto's lips increased. When it did, she was surprised as Naruto slipped his tongue through the opening she gave him and began to explore. She was unsure what to do at first, but within a few moments and with some prodding from Naruto gained confidence and began to duel with Naruto's tongue, moaning out as she felt Naruto's appendage caress and entwine with her own. After a moment it was clear she had lost and let Naruto explore the inside of her mouth. When Naruto's tongue left her, she pushed her own into his mouth and began to explore. A smile came to her lips as they kissed. Naruto tasted just like ramen. Not surprising, since despite not eating anywhere near as much anymore, that was what Naruto often took her to get unless she wanted something else. Eventually, and much to their mutual disappointment, the kiss ended. Conan sighed as she closed her eyes and snuggled into Naruto's chest. How much longer can you stay? Naruto asked after a few moments of companionable silence. I can stay until tomorrow without Pain getting suspicious, Conan said after a moment of thought. I usually leave the vicinity of his tower for several days to walk around AIM unless he calls, so we should be safe. Naruto nodded as he relaxed again. His hands began to lightly trail up and down Conan's side, making the young woman feel a slight shiver. Naruto. Conan suddenly spoke up. Naruto mumbled, letting her know he was listening. I was wondering if I could spend the night with you. Conan asked with a blush coming across her features. While she had stayed the night with him often, they had not slept together since that incident in the cottage with the kids. Naruto felt his eyes widen slightly before he smirked. Kona-chan, are you making the moves on me so soon? I mean, we just got together, Naruto spoke in a teasing tone. Conan scowled at the blonde as a large blush spread across her face before saw his teasing grin and it turned into a smile. She slapped his shoulder in a playful gesture. No, I meant, she paused a bit to take a deep breath. I meant that I want to stay with you. Just for tonight at least. I would like to feel your presence with me while I sleep. You know, once all of this is over it won't just be for tonight, Naruto said in an amused voice as Conan looked up at him. But since Ero-sensei is out on business today and won't be around for another few days, you can stay with me tonight. Conan giggled at Naruto's apt nickname for their sensei as she snuggled back into the blonde. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Later that night they had gotten to the hotel that Naruto was staying at and got ready for bed. Naruto was the first to get his nightly hygiene activities out of the way. As the blonde got into bed, Conan went into the restroom to do her own routine. A little while later she walked out of the bathroom in just a small light red nightie that brought out her hair and blue lacy panties. Naruto noticed rather easily that she was not wearing a bra due to the fact that he could see her nipples slightly poking into the nightie and had to struggle to keep his natural reaction from coming to the forefront. The blue-haired woman moved over to the bed and got under the covers. As soon as she did, Naruto's arm wrapped around her waist and pulled her to him, turning her on her side as the blonde pressed his front against her back. Good night, Kona-chan, Naruto said in a soft whisper as he kissed the nape of her neck. Conan smiled as she closed her eyes and moved herself closer to Naruto until they were practically melded together. Night, Naruto-kun. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. It's time for us to capture the Jinchuriki, Pain stated as once again all of those in Akatsuki met. Conan watched from Pain's side as all of the others nodded at his words. The blue-haired woman knew this going to happen soon. Pain had been talking about going after the Jinchuriki once they found them all for a while now. It had taken 3 years, but Pain had finally managed to find out where all of the Jinchuriki were located. She would need to find out where the members were being sent so she could tell Naruto. Pain turned to look at 2 of the 9 members that were here. Sasori, Deidre, how far are you to the target? The one with the hunchback look shifted. We'll be nearing Suna and the one tails soon. Good. Pain said as his eyes pierced the others in the room. I want constant updates on your target's status. That goes for all of you. The figures all disappeared again, leaving the room empty save for the ugly statue. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto hesitated in his step when he felt his kunai begin to pulse as he walked alongside Ero-sensei. Looking over, he made sure to see whether or not the man noticed. Once he was satisfied, Naruto turned his attention to the kunai. After his success with the chakra recognition seal on Conan's kunai, Naruto had put it on each of the girls' kunai, that way he could summon them if they wanted to get out of their village. He had used it several times with Mei, Koyuki and Yugito, and despite the people they lived with freaking out when they were unable to find them, Naruto and the girls continued to do it. Recognizing the signature as Conan's, Naruto looked over at Jiraiya. "Hey Ero-sensei, one of the girls are calling me." Jiraiya gave his student a lecherous grin. "My boy, I am so proud of you, getting 3 powerful and hot women like that." Naruto eyebrow twitched. "Can it, ya damn pervert. Ga, if it's going to be like this every time, maybe I shouldn't tell you and just flash away rather than listen to your pervy speech. And you wonder why the only woman you get are the ones you have to pay for. Hey, show some respect, Gaki." Jiraiya yelled at his blonde pupil. "I'll show you respect the moment you earn it, and stop peeping in the hot spring, you perverted old coot." "Who are you calling an old coot?" Naruto grinned. "The only one I see standing right next to me." "You damn brat, I oughta." He didn't get the chance to say anything else as Naruto disappeared in a bright yellow flash. He paused for a few seconds as he blinked at the spot Naruto had been standing. Damn Gaki, not giving respect to his elders. At least he's good with woman, Jiraiya said to himself with a small giggle as he pulled out a notebook. "It's too bad I'm not there to see anything happen, but the ideas this kid gives me from what I do see and hear alone is a gold mine." Jiraiya let out a perverted giggle as he began walking down the road, giving off perverted giggles as he wrote down the ideas for his next hit book, Ika Ika, Lone Warrior, a tale about a powerful shinobi with a tragic past who ends up saving the world and in thanks receives his very own harem. The white-haired man giggled as he began writing out more scenes for his book. He was sure this would be a great hit, especially when he released them in the limited editions he was creating, blonde, blue and red. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX Naruto flashed to the cave where he had first met Conan. Finding nothing larger than a mouse within the sensor seals he had set up, Naruto summoned said woman. The first thing the woman did when she got there was to wrap Naruto in a hug and plant a kiss on his lips. Pleasantly surprised, Naruto returned the gesture before they broke away. "Something wrong, Kona-chan?" Naruto asked as he could sense a small amount of tension, though it seemed to be leaving her. Conan shook her head. "No, just important information you might want to know." Naruto raised his eyebrow but didn't speak. "Akatsuki is going to begin hunting for the Biju now. Their first target will be the One-Tails. Sasori no Akasuna and Deidre the Mad Bomber are the ones assigned to this task." Suna-a. Naruto mumbled more to himself than Conan. He looked up from his musings and gave said woman a smile. "Thank you for telling me this. Gaara is not only a Jinchuriki but a good friend of mine." Leaning down, Naruto gave her a tender kiss on the lips. I'm sure you'll come up with ways to thank me." Conan spoke up between kisses. Naruto gave her his foxy grin as he pulled a little bit away. "You know, after I save Gaara, I think I've got just the thing to express my gratitude." Conan blushed at the implication and tone of Naruto's voice, though she was quite eager to see what Naruto would do for her. Naruto looked out of the cave mouth as he thought about the information he had just received. A smile found its way to his lips. It would be good to see Gaara again. His smile grew into a grin. It would be even better after having Gaara owe him for saving his ass. XXXXXXXXXXXXX Omake. What pain does when not stewing in his god complex. Conan sighed as she walked down the hall towards Pain's office. She had just received some information on one of the Jinchuriki and in keeping with her cover was going to inform Pain about it. As she walked her mind straight and she began to think of Naruto, she hoped to see the blonde again soon. Finally she reached the door leading to Pain's office. Like usual, she did not bother to knock on the door since Pain was usually outside anyways. As soon as she opened the door, however, she froze. Her eyes began to widen to the size of dinner plates. Pain was in fact in the office, his back to her as he sat in a chair, and while this was unusual, it was not unheard of. However, what was unusual and most disturbing was a combination of the things he was doing and what was going on in the room. In front of Pain was a television. On said TV was the new Ika Ika movie playing, which was rather easy for her to recognize. After all, while she would never admit it, she had the same movie stashed away under her bed. Pain himself was making unusual panting and grunting noises as well as mumbling what sounded like, "Yes, Akiko-chan," and Damn that Jinchuriki, which was highly disturbing to her, especially considering that Pain's god realm was nothing more than a possessed corpse, and of a man she had once loved no less. The orange-haired man seemed to be so preoccupied with his activities he had not even noticed her presence. For what felt like hours but in truth was only a minute or two, Conan just stood there with her mouth hanging open and her eyes nearly popping out of her sockets. Finally she turned on her heel and left, closing the door behind her so Pain would not know she had been there. She began walking down the hall and mentally swore to herself she would never ever mention what she saw this day, lest she get nightmares from this. Chapter 6. Human Puppets, Bombing Transvestites and Rescuing a Cage. Jiraiya looked at his student and shook his head. So, another bounty, eh? Naruto nodded as he sealed up all of his equipment in several scrolls containing weapons, seals, medical supplies and anything else he could think of, and placed them in the containment seals on his pouches. I don't really need the money or experience, but I hear this guy's been terrorizing a small mining town. Jiraiya smirked at his student. Well, just make sure you're careful and don't get cocky. You may be powerful, but even the strongest of people can be taken down. You tell me that every time I leave, Naruto said with an amused smirk, you worried about your precious student. Worried that I might not have any new material for my books if you go and get yourself killed, Jiraiya shot back as they went through their usual banter. You do know if I see any material that I even suspect has me or the girls in I will castrate you, right? Questioned the blonde with a sadistic grin on his face. Jiraiya snorted, kind of hard to find out when you refuse to read my work. Naruto shrugged, I'll just have your publisher tell me. After all, ever since my novel came out he's liked me more than you. Jiraiya gave him a mock glare as Naruto returned it with a cheeky grin, I'll probably be gone a few weeks so don't wait up. Yeah, whatever. Jiraiya waved him off, just get going. Naruto grinned as he left their small hotel room. Two people were walking through the desert towards Suna, and while they were both wearing the same uniforms they couldn't be more different. One of them had blonde hair that was tied in a ponytail and had large piece of hair hanging over one side of his face to cover his eye with a large straw hat that was covering his head and had stringers falling around it. The other person was short and had a hunched over back and was wearing a bandana over his mouth, covering the lower half of his face so that all you could see were his black eyes. On top of his head was a straw hat with a single tassel, which he used to cover and hide the rest of his face. Both of them were wearing black cloaks with red clouds, the clothing of Akatsuki, and were S-class missing ninja. However, both of them were so different from each other it was hard to imagine they were partners. I'm telling you, Sasori-senpai, art lasts for a single brilliant moment before it withers away into nothingness. Yeah, the blonde one said. Sasori sighed as he listened to his partner. They had been having this argument since they became partners. Sasori always wondered what Leader Sama had been thinking when he put the two of them together, and I'm telling you, Deidre, art is eternal. True beauty lasts forever and never dies over time, that way people can enjoy it longer. Sasori-senpai, as much as I respect you, I have to tell you you're wrong. True art is. Gaara looked out over Sunagakur from the top of the Cage Tower. A lot had changed in the past 3 years since he had been beaten by Naruto during the Chunin exams. Gaara was wearing the robes of the Cage over his Suna Jonin attire, absent was the gourd that he usually wore on his back. It had been over 3 years since that battle where his whole life had been changed for the better. After Naruto had beaten him, Gaara had realized that the path he had been taking did not grant one true strength or happiness, and neither did it vilify his existence. Wanting the strength that boy had, Gaara had begun to make amends, starting with his family Temari and Kankuro. Making amends with them had actually been easy, since despite being afraid of him they both still loved him. However, getting the villagers to see him as his siblings did was a whole different kettle of fish. Well, if they had fish in Suna. It had taken a lot more work to get them to stop fearing him and a constant effort on his part. However, through hard work and with the support of his siblings he had been able to overcome the hate the villagers had on him and gain acceptance, and just last year Gaara had been accepted as the Godime Cage. As he stared at the village he had sworn to protect, he wondered where the person who had made this all possible was and how he was doing. Naruto had been his first friend, the first person to accept him and the only person he knew who could understand him. It was only because of the blonde shinobi that Gaara was able to change and gain the acceptance he had always craved. He knew that Naruto was currently on a training trip with Jiraiya of the Sennin, the rumors and stories that had spread about Naruto had reached everywhere in the elemental nations. It made Gaara curious to see how powerful Naruto had become. Kazekage-sama, Gaara turned his head to see one of the council members behind him. The meeting is beginning soon. Gaara nodded. Very well. He looked out over the village one last time before following the council member to the council chamber. The council chamber itself was merely a large cylindrical room with a circular table. Around the table were 12 seats for those who were a part of Suna's council. Gaara entered the chamber and took his seat between Baki and Yura. Baki had been Gaara's Jonin sensei during the invasion of the Chunin exams. After the invasion had failed, Baki had been the one who had pushed for them not to do anything rash and try to get the peace treaty between Konoha and Suna reneged. Later he had been appointed to the advisory council for his loyalty to Suna, and had been the one who promoted and supported Gaara's rise to the position of Kazekage. Baki had always been of the belief that loyalty to your village was one of the most important things to a shinobi. No matter what the situation was, he would always strive towards doing what he felt was best for the village. Baki now wore the robes of a counselor over his Jonin attire. He still had a bandana on his head with a cloth covering half of his face. Yura was the Jonin who had originally been in charge of the guards who watched the gate into Sunagakure. 4 years ago he had managed to work his way up towards the position on the advisory council. Yura wore counselor robes and wrap-around bandana. He had spiky bangs that covered half of his face and a small beard. The Chunin exams are coming soon. One of the counselors stated as this was Suna's year to host the exams. I am looking forward to the results. Yura stood from his seat to garner everyone's attention, as am I, however. I have received some rather disturbing information on a rumor that has come up recently. What kind of rumors? Asked Baki as he looked at the man. This information is from Jiraiya of the Legendary Three, Yura stated, getting everyone's attention. Have you all heard of a group called Akatsuki? Mumbling surrounded the announcement of that name, while many people knew of them, most thought they were a simple mercenary group. Gaara looked at Yura as he continued. They seem to be a powerful group made of 9S class ninja who are after a specific group of people. They are after Jinchuriki. The noise in the room increased as everyone began to talk about the information. Many of the advisors were looking at Gaara, who remained impassive at the information. Furthermore, I believe that because of the threat these people pose, I think it would behoove us to tighten security during the Chunin exams, just to be on the safe side, Yura continued. Do you believe these people pose a serious threat to Kazekage-sama? Asked one of the other council members. The information itself comes from Jiraiya-sama, Yura said in answer. If he feels that they are a threat, I believe it would be best to err on the side of caution. You make many good points, Counselor Yura, stated Gaara, who had up until this point been silent. When the young Kazekage spoke, everyone quieted down. It was a rare event for Gaara to speak at the meetings, but when he did, they were often said with a wisdom not usually found in one so young. We will do as you suggest and up the security measures during the Chunin exams. It would also be a good show of strength while the other nation's shinobi are here. I would like you to handle the security detail. Can you do it, Yura? Of course, Kazekage-sama, Yura said with a bow. The rest of the meeting was mainly listening to the various pieces of information about the Chunin exams, as well as the security measures Yura was going to take. Then this meeting is adjourned, Baki said as the members of the council stood up to leave. Gaara stood up as well and began to make his way to the Kazekage Tower. Since he could not sleep, he might as well finish the paperwork. Yura began to walk through the halls of the council buildings with one of the other members. Well done, Yura, the man said. It is a fine idea to tighten the security on the village. Even Kazekage-sama seemed to think so. I'm just glad I could help my superiors that I've been working for the past 4 years, Yura said in a humble tone. Besides, this information came from Jiraiya-sama himself, so I had to make a decision quickly. Stopping, Yura's eyes widened as he felt an intense headache. Grabbing his head, the man bent down as he tried to get the pain to leave. Hey, are you all right? The other council member asked. Yes, I just haven't been getting enough sleep, Yura said, straightening up. The Jonin counselor shook his head and began to walk again. What was that? Wondered Yura as he continued walking. Deidre and Sasori continued their trek across the hot desert of Suna. Deidre looked over at Sasori and had to wonder how the man could not be bothered by this stifling heat. Looking out over the desert, Deidre decided to make conversation. So those people Orochimaru tricked are up ahead, yeah? Deidre asked. When Sasori didn't answer, Deidre looked out across the dunes. It seems that for some reason he leaked our information and turned into a traitor. Yeah. We don't have a choice it seems, Sasori said after a long moment of silence. I don't know what he's like after using that jutsu either. Sasori spoke, referring to the body possession jutsu the snake Sennin had made. The puppet user looked at Deidre, who had grabbed a bag from his pouch. Will you be alright with just that bag? Our opponent is a Jinchuriki after all. I wouldn't worry about me, Deidre said as he unzipped a pouch on his waist and stuck his hand in. My jutsu are all artistic, so I came up with my favorite, number 18. Yeah. Because our opponent is the one tails. Yeah. Deidre brought his hand out of the pouch to show that the bottom of his hand had a mouth on it. As they continued walking, they eventually came upon the gates of Suna. Along the walls were several dozen guards who were currently staring at the two figures that were coming their way in surprise. Before any of the shinobi had a chance to react, Yura, who had come up just moments ago, killed them by activating several traps. Walking to the front of the gate, Yura got down on one knee as he bowed to the two of them as they walked up. Sasori and Deidre walked up to the bowed down figure. Well done, Sasori said in his gruff voice. Do you remember me? Yes, sir. Of course, Sasori-sama. Yura said, still in a kneeling position. Good. Since your memories have returned, you are my faithful servant, Sasori stated, pleased to see that his slave seal had done its work properly. All right. Deidre said, if you'd forgotten, I might have had to use my jutsu. Yeah. Deidre looked at the mouth on his left hand as it finished chewing the clay he had it eat. All right then, here we go. The mouth coughed up some clay and Deidre began to mold it into a bird. Sasori, your husband should watch to. Yeah, Deidre said in a teasing voice. He threw the bird into the hair and held his hands in a hand sign. There was a puff of smoke, and when it cleared, the little bird that Deidre had molded was now twice as large as Deidre himself. Jumping on the bird, Deidre threw off his hat and grinned as he looked back at Sasori. What do you think of my artistic modeling? Yeah. Deidre asked Sasori as he flew into the air, not giving the man a chance to speak. The Ikibi Jinchuriki had a date with his art. Naruto sighed as he looked out over the desert. Everything looked the same for miles and miles. All that he could see were sand dunes and more sand dunes. Now he knew why Jiraiya had never taken him to Suna. I wonder how Gaara could stand this desert, and this heat. Putting his hood up, Naruto started walking out into the desert. As he walked, he found himself glad that he had started taking some bounty hunter work, otherwise it would have been much harder to escape from Ero-sensei. After his meeting with Konan, Jiraiya had asked where Naruto had gone off to. In order to make an excuse, Naruto had claimed he had done some bounty hunter work. This seemed to convince Jiraiya, and he had actually started to give the blonde bounties as a form of training. Whenever Naruto was out catching a bounty, he would usually be able to visit or teleport one of the 4 girls who had come into his life. That way he could for the most part avoid Jiraiya's constant lecherous comments. It was also a good alibi for what he was about to do, since when accepting a bounty, Naruto would often disappear for about a week or two. Naruto sighed again as he looked out over the desert and thanked Kami that his cloak hid him from the sun. Still, this heat is stifling. Gaara sat in his office after having just finished the last bit of paperwork. A part of him wondered why other cages like Tsunade always complained about having too much paperwork to do. Of course, because Gaara could not sleep, he was able to get all of his paperwork finished faster. Still, he mused that it would be easier for them to just do the work rather than complain and throw it off. As he continued on with his musings, Gaara looked out of the window behind his desk and frowned when he spotted a giant white bird flying outside. Deidre grinned as he looked down at the village where the One-Tails was supposed to be. Moving the hair out of his eye, he revealed that he was wearing a viewing lens and camera. He pressed a button on the side and began to count the number of ninja on the roofs. Once he got a good lock on all 3 sky guards, he made 3 small clay spiders. This village's artistic design isn't too shabby, he said with a large grin. It will definitely be worth ruining. Yeah. Deidre threw the spiders and made a hand seal. There was a small puff of smoke and the 3 spiders landed near the 3 guards. The spiders jumped onto the guards and Deidre made another hand sign as he channeled some chakra into his creations. Art as a bang. The 3 clay spiders exploded on guards. They were small explosions, but each one was enough to kill the guards they were attached to. Deidre made his clay bird dive down as he jumped off and landed on the roof of the cage tower. Infiltration successful. Deidre smirked only for his eyes to widen as he looked up. Standing in front of him was Gaara, garbed in his maroon robe and one strap over the shoulder flak jacket. Before Deidre could even speak, a wave of sand came at him from the left. Deidre jumped into the air just as the sand crashed into where he had been standing. Landing on his bird, he looked at Gaara, who began to wave his arms as if guiding an orchestra. The sand began to move towards Deidre as Gaara jumped on it. The mad bomber looked at Gaara and smirked. "Ho, if it isn't the Ikibi Jinchuriki, yeah, how did you know I was attacking?" he asked. "In this desert," Gaara said in his monotone voice, "no bird like that exists." "Hey, seems like all my sneaking was in failure, yeah," Deidre said with a grin, "but whatever, at least now I don't need to look for you, yeah." Gaara said nothing as he raised his hands. Deidre began to prepare some clay bomb birds for his attack. Just a little ways outside the gates of Suna, a large wave of sand shot into the air. There was hundreds of tons of sand from the desert that Gaara could control, and all of it headed for Deidre. The sand turned into huge claws that soon made a grab at Deidre in an attempt to crush him. Deidre's bird weaved in between the attacks as he rummaged through his bag. Pulling out his hands, he made several more clay birds, these ones of a more sleek design than some of his other work, as he threw them at Gaara. A hand seal later and there was a burst of smoke. The birds grew a little bit and came to life as they flew around the sand and headed straight towards the young cage. Seeing them coming, Gaara manipulated the sand around him into a shield to protect himself from the explosion. A small eye appeared just outside of the dome of sand that Gaara was in and locked onto Deidre, who was looking at the sand with a smirk. "It's like the eggshell protects the inner contents." Deidre didn't get the chance to say anything else as sand began to encircle him, compressing itself in the hopes of crushing him. Just as the sand fully compressed into a sphere, Deidre shot out, however the sand latched onto his arm as he was falling down. "Sabaku Q," Gaara said as he made his hand into a fist. Deidre's eyes widened in pain as he felt his arm being crushed. As Deidre fell, he made an owl with his uncrushed hand. Making a hand sign, the owl grew and Deidre landed on it as he got away from the sand, though it was not enough to save the rest of his arm. The blonde bomber grimaced as he looked at the stump where his arm had been. "You're good, yeah," Deidre said as his remaining arm went into his pouch and began to gather clay. The bomber realized that he only had a little bit of clay left. He looked over at Gaara and tried to analyze his opponent and find a weakness. Looking at the sand Gaara was on, he realized that it was most likely specially made sand that he carried in his gourd. Realizing that that was where he got his ultimate defense sand, Deidre devised a plan. Molding his clay, he made one of his most powerful explosives. Deidre smirked as he readied his strategy. On the ground, Kankuro, Baki and several other ninja were looking up at the large sphere of sand next to the smaller one. It was clear the cage was fighting. "From looking at the shape, we can assume that Kage-Sama's opponent is Akatsuki," Baki said as the ninja gathered around him and Kankuro. All of the ninja were currently staring at the battle taking place, looking unsure of what to do when faced with an opponent who could remain airborne. "It's just as I thought," Kankuro said as his hands turned into fists. The minute he had seen the giant wave of sand coming from the desert, Kankuro figured that the Akatsuki had somehow snuck into their village and that Gaara was battling them. "Hurry and prepare for battle. We're going to assist." The cage, Baki said as he began to order their forces. Medical teams set up a barrier. As the ninja began to follow Baki's orders, said ninja turned to look at Kankuro. Kankuro turned to look at Baki. "What is it?" "We need to consider what will happen if Gaara loses control and Shukaku comes out again," Baki said in a solemn voice. While the Jonin had faith in Gaara's abilities and did not want to consider that this could happen, he felt it would be best for the village if they took all variables into account. "That won't happen," Kankuro shook his head. "Gaara won't harm the people of this village." Flashback. "You know, I didn't want to say this, but I think this is one of your craziest ideas," Kankuro said to Gaara, who was staring out at the desert. "I mean, our superiors don't really like you, and the village is deathly afraid of you. By separating from us and trying to involve yourself with the regular shinobi out of the blue like this, it's going to be hard." He looked at his brother, who just continued to stare at the desert. He was unsure what to think when Gaara had told him that he wanted to integrate himself into the standard shinobi forces. Though he knew Gaara had changed since the failed invasion of Konoha, the first conscious words that came out of his brother's mouth was an apology for all the things he had done to him and Tamari. He knew his brother wanted to change the way he was looked at, but he still didn't think this was a good idea. Gaara was silent for a moment as he listened to Kankuro. "I know, but by just waiting, I get attacked by an even greater anguish." All one can do is create his own path through hard work, without being a loner and taking the easy path. Gaara fell silent for a moment as he tried to put what he wanted to say into words. Someday I hope to be like him. Kankuro stayed silent as he listened to Gaara, knowing who he was speaking of. So that's why I as one of the Sans shinobi aim to be Kazekage, to bond with and live for this village. Gaara, Kankuro said, awed by how much his brother had truly changed after his battle with that orange-clad shinobi. It was one of the things Kankuro would have never thought possible, that some boy who no one had really thought much about and seemed to be the dead last of his graduating class could not only beat Gaara but also said something that fundamentally changed the young redhead. Through hard work I want to be respected by everybody, I got that from Naruto Uzumaki. But up until now, bonds have been nothing more than an annoyance to the point I would want to kill everything. But when I fought Naruto he told me, he gains his strength by protecting his precious people, because they give him a reason to exist. I saw that strength for myself and I feel like I can understand just what he meant a little better. Hate, sadness and even happiness, to be able to share these things with another person. Gaara looked out at the desert with a contemplative look on his face. I learned that with my fight from Naruto Uzumaki. He knew pain like I did, and he taught me that you can change that path. Gaara nodded to himself as if to confirm his beliefs. One day I wish to be needed by somebody, not as a frightening weapon. Gaara turned his head and Kankuro saw a small smile on it, but as the Sans Kazekage. Flashback end. Naruto looked up into the sky as he finally saw Suna in sight, channeling chakra into his eyes. Naruto zoomed in on the battle going on overhead. Looks like Gaara's already been started his battle. Naruto sighed. Well then I'd better. Naruto was cut off as his instincts forced him to jump from his spot just as a giant tail crashed down where he had been. Looking at the tail Naruto followed it to a hunchbacked figure. Naruto recognized it as Akasuna no Sasori, Sasori of the Red Sand, from the description Kona-chan gave him. The blonde looked at Sasori with a smirk. You know it's rude to try and kill someone without even introducing yourself. He was answered with the tail trying to impale him. Moving into a series of backflips Naruto got some distance between him and Sasori. Said man looking at him with narrowed eyes, who are you? Sasori asked. Oh no one important. Naruto said with a smirk even though Sasori could not see it through his face mask, I'm just trying to get through to help the Kazekage. Then I am afraid I cannot let you pass, and if you try I am going to have to kill you, Sasori said as he took off his cloak and got down all fours to reveal that he was inside a puppet. It had a large tail that was coming out of an orange mask, the legs and arms had joints that made odd clicking noises as they moved. I do not know who you are but if you really are here to help the Kazekage then I am afraid I must kill you. Naruto's smirk widened. Well you know that's fine by me since I was already planning on killing you anyways Sasori. Sasori was surprised that this person knew who he was but did not show. He focused his eyes on the hooded shinobi. There was nothing about the man that would reveal the type or style of fighting he used. The large black cloak covered his entire frame all the way to the feet. The hood covered up his hair and because of the face mask the puppet user could not even see who it was. Naruto raised a hand towards Sasori and pointed two fingers at him. Raiden. Byakuri. Lightning release. Pale white lightning. A large bolt of lightning so bright it looked white was shot from Naruto's fingers straight at Sasori. Despite being in a puppet Sasori moved out of the way quickly. Naruto appeared right in front of the puppet user and was about to attack only to be forced to dodge Sasori's tail. Jumping back Naruto was forced to dodge a hail of Senbon. According to Kona-chan those Senbon are poisonous. I don't think poison will work on me but it will still take time to flush it from my system so I better not get hit by any of those. Thinking on his feet Naruto thrust a closed fist forward as another burst of Senbon came his way. Fuden. Genkatsu no Kase. Wind release. Fist of wind. A giant blast of wind in the shape of a large fist blasted the Senbon away and headed for Sasori. The puppet user managed to move out of the way in time to dodge. But Naruto had already calculated where he would be and was waiting for him with a spinning ball of chakra in his hand. Naruto thrust the Rasengan right into the puppet user. A body was launched out of the one Naruto had just destroyed, landing several feet away before standing up. It's been a long time since anyone could defeat Haruko, Sasori said with a voice that sounded really young. As Sasori looked up Naruto saw that the person still looked like a teenage boy. According to Conan Sasori had turned himself into a puppet when he was younger. This not only gave him eternal life, but also made him stop aging at the time he had been turned into a puppet. I will enjoy adding you to my collection, Sasori said as he pulled out a scroll and unrolled it. There was a puff of smoke and Naruto found himself staring at the figure that came out. It was a puppet, with an olive complexion, spiky black hair and a long brown cloak. This puppet was the hardest one to get in my collection, Sasori spoke, you should feel honored to see it. I see, so you turned the Sandaime cage into a puppet, Naruto said as he narrowed his eyes. While the cage were not a cage of Konoha, they were still cages, a position that Naruto respected no matter what village it came from. So to see one of the village's cages having their corpse desecrated and used by someone pissed the blonde shinobi off, however he knew that he needed to keep his wits about him and so did not let any of his emotions come through to cloud his judgment. Correct, Sasori said as he began to manipulate his fingers. In response, the Sandaime cage came forward. One of the Kazekige's hands came up and several large wires came out shooting towards Naruto, said blonde unsealed Susanna as he dodged out of the way of the wires. He rolled to the left just as the cage shot several poisoned blades at him. Coming up on his feet, Naruto spun around and slashed several wires apart with a Kase no Yibe before they could come at him. Naruto was forced to continue dodging wires and knives as Sasori tried to catch him off guard. Rolling under a set of wires, Naruto found himself suddenly immobilized as several latched onto him from behind. The cage lifted up his other hand and poison gas shot out of it towards Naruto, covering the entire area around the blonde in noxious fumes. Sasori waited for a minute and when nothing happened assumed the hooded man had died. Just as he was about to bring the Sandaime cage back, the area that was covered with poison exploded, revealing the Naruto that Sasori had captured to be a Bushin Daibaku, a great exploding clone. Naruto burst from the ground right next to the cage with a Rasengan pointed at the human puppet. Sasori managed to move the cage puppet out of the way to avoid being destroyed, but he was not fast enough to keep his prized puppet from losing its arm. As the cage moved back, a large pillar of sand began to coalesce in front of it. The top of the pillar gained a sharp point. The blonde shinobi knew what this was. Like Gaara, the Sandaime cage had the ability to manipulate and control sand. Naruto was unsure how it was done, but given the name Iron Sand, Naruto assumed the man's bloodline allowed him to manipulate the iron particles found in the sand, possibly through magnetism or some other form of control. It was said that the Sandaime cage had created the ability based off of Shukaku itself, hoping to find a way to utilize the power of the desert without the Biju. The pillar soon came barreling down point first towards Naruto. The Uzumaki Namikaze air resealed Susanna as he dodged the giant pillar. Naruto came at the cage with another Rasengan and tried to smash into the puppet. A sphere of sand covered the Kazekige's frame to block the ball of destructive chakra. Sand shot everywhere as the Rasengan drilled into it, but despite the power behind the jutsu, Naruto was unable to penetrate the protective sand sphere. He was forced to jump back and dodge several spikes that shot out of the protective sand, moving into an impressive series of twirls and flips as the sand spikes shot out at and then flew past him. As soon as Naruto's feet touched the ground, he rolled to the left, dodging another large pillar that crashed into the sand. Getting onto his feet, Naruto took out a scroll from his pouch. Unsealing, a large torrent of water came out. Naruto went through a few hand seals before calling out his jutsu. Hyoten. Tokatsu Ryu no Jutsu. Ice Release. Ice Dragon Jutsu. A giant dragon formed out of the water before freezing over and turning into ice. The great 60-foot beast turned its yellow eyes towards the cage and flew forward. The iron sand of the cage came to the puppet's protection. When the ice dragon hit, the sand began to actually freeze over. This technique had taken Naruto a year to create and master. Naruto combined wind and water and then condensed it to the point that the water became a more malleable version of ice. Naruto was able to not only shape it into the form of a dragon, but upon impact would reduce the amount of wind chakra in the technique, melting the ice before compressing the water with his wind chakra again to make anything that was wet freeze over. It took more chakra than most of his ice techniques, especially since he was out in the desert, but the surprise and disbelief he saw which caused Sasori to hesitate from an ice jutsu being used in the desert were well worth it. Unsealing Susanna again, Naruto shot towards the cage puppet, using wind chakra to increase the length of the blade and sharpen it to the point where only a EFW metals in the entire world would be able to withstand it. Naruto's blade moved in several flashes of light as the blonde appeared behind the Sandame case cage. Naruto resealed the blade as the case cage fell apart into 6 different segments. Sasori looked at Naruto, who was breathing a little heavier than before. You are definitely impressive, I will enjoy turning you into a puppet. Naruto smirked. I'll be taking you out long before you can turn me into anything. We'll see, Sasori said as he removed his shirt to reveal that he was in fact a puppet himself, with 2 5-point propeller blades came out of his elbows and several scrolls on his back. Naruto also noticed that where the man's heart would be was a container with the kanji for here. He assumed that that was where Sasori's weak point was. It's been a while since I've used myself, Sasori stated as he raised a hand before a large scroll detached from his back and connected to the hand. Aiming at the blonde, Sasori shot out a powerful jet of water towards Naruto. Said blonde merely smirked as he brought his hand forward and infused his own chakra into the jet of water. He wrested control of the water from Sasori and sent it right back at him. Sasori jumped to the left as he was forced to dodge his own attack. Using one of my most powerful elements against me was a foolish move, Naruto stated, and Sasori could almost see the smirk on his face. I apologize, Sasori said as he held up his other hand. Why don't we try this one? A powerful blast of fire shot out, coming at Naruto, who began to run away from the fire, which started following him as Sasori kept the blonde in his sights. Naruto was able to just barely stay ahead of the flame and realized he needed more speed. Making a single hand sign, Naruto charged chakra into several seals located throughout his body. Kai, release. Were it not for his cloak, Sasori would have been able to see several lines begin to run along Naruto's arm, legs, chest and back. As Naruto did have the cloak on, he did not see those, so when the blonde shinobi suddenly disappeared in a burst of pure speed, Sasori was shocked. It was only a case of hard-earned shinobi instincts that allowed him to dodge as Naruto appeared on his left with a massive Rasengan in hand. There was a large explosion as the Udoma Rasengan blew up and sent sand and dusts everywhere. Naruto came flying out of the blast like a bat out of hell as he launched himself towards Sasori. Said opponent tried to launch a jet of flame at him, but the blonde merely kicked up his speed again and disappeared. Sasori looked around for his opponent only to find him coming down from above. Sasori brought his 5-bladed propeller blades in an attempt to slice his opponent to ribbons. Naruto unsealed Susanna for another round. Sasori jumped away when Naruto's blade became nothing more than several flashes of silver. The puppet user looked at his opponent before looking at where his blades used to be. He looked back at his opponent, who was staring at him, the man's eyes completely dead, reminding the puppet master of a certain red-eyed shinobi in Akatsuki. Never in his life had Sasori faced such a strong opponent. So far he had been unable to actually do anything to the young man and was starting to find himself backed into a corner. Sasori realized would need to fight using something more powerful to beat this enemy, or perhaps more numerous. Sasori removed one of the scrolls from his back as a compartment in his chest opened up. There was a large puff of smoke as several hundred chakra strings were launched from the puppet's chest. When the smoke was blown away by a light wind, it revealed 100 puppets surrounding Naruto. I would like to introduce you to my most powerful jutsu, Sasori said. Naruto was sure that if the man's puppet body could smirk, it would be. This jutsu has taken down entire fortresses before. Naruto looked around at all the puppets and sighed. That's a lot of puppets, said Naruto in a voice that was as lazy and uncaring as a certain pineapple-headed Nara air. Looks like I'm gonna have to use that jutsu, the blonde thought as he reached his hands into the 2 pouches at his hips. When he pulled them out, there were 5 Hiraishin kunai in between each finger. While this is an impressive jutsu, I feel I should tell you. Naruto disappeared. Sasori looked around his opponent only to find him in the air. My jutsu has destroyed whole armies. Naruto released the kunai into the puppets at an even 15 meters so that he could get the maximum effect for the sensor seal arrays. Before his opponents even had the chance to do anything, Naruto disappeared in a bright yellow flash of light. All around Sasori, his puppets were destroyed as they were smashed to pieces with powerful kicks and punches, sliced into even segments with wind, or blown to bits with a Rasengan. Sasori looked down when he felt an odd prick on his wooden body to see a sword sticking right through his heart container. He turned his head to see the person who had just defeated him. His hood had fallen off, revealing a mop of spiky blonde hair and cerulean blue eyes. It seems you've beaten me, Sasori stated. To think I had been fighting one of the people we've been trying to capture this whole time. Looks like I Estima. Naruto sighed as he pulled out his sword and watched the body slump to the ground. Pulling up his hood, Naruto looked over towards the village and felt his eyes widen. He had been paying so much attention to his own fight that he had completely forgotten about Gaara's battle. Right now they're a giant thing falling towards the village. Remembering Conan's information that Sasori's partner had a fetish for explosions, Naruto set off at his maximum speed. While showing no outward emotion, Gaara mentally cursed as the giant explosive began to fall on the village. Redirecting his sand, Gaara created a large protective barrier over the village in the shape of a bull. The giant and odd-shaped explosive hit the barrier and exploded. However, something happened that surprised and shocked both Gaara and Deidre. The explosion was beginning to warp towards one point as if it was caught in some kind of slipstream. Everything from the explosion to Gaara's sand was pulled into that one spot before it disappeared. What happened to my art? Deidre asked in frustration as he looked over to see an equally stunned Gaara. Just then something stuck into the head of his clay owl. He didn't even get the chance to see what it was before a large explosion took over the owl he was on. Gaara watched as Deidre's bird exploded in confusion. He was not sure what had just happened. When the explosion lived out its life, Gaara saw that Deidre was gone. The young Kazekage looked around to see if there was any trace of the Akatsuki member left, which was when he noticed a cloaked figure on the roof looking at him. He didn't know why, but Gaara felt a sense of familiarity when he saw the blue eyes of the stranger. When the Kazekage blinked, the figure was gone, causing him to wonder if he had seen it at all. Shaking his head, Gaara floated his sand down until he was on the ground, where he became surrounded by his ninja who were congratulating him on beating such a strong opponent. Soon after, the villagers who had seen Gaara's act of defending the village came out and began to cheer for him too. Despite not being hated anymore, Gaara was finding it awkward to receive such high praise and affection, especially when several women exclaimed how hot he was. Gaara. Turning his head, Gaara spotted Kankuro and Baki coming towards him. Kankuro, Baki, Gaara greeted. What happened? Kankuro asked. What was that? When the explosion and your sand? I have no clue, Gaara said, shaking his head. I have never seen anything like it. So then if you didn't do that, then who did? Asked Baki. The three of them were silent amongst the cheering. None of them had an answer to that. Deciding not to worry about that for now, Gaara looked out at the people who were cheering his name. A small smile graced his lips. It was this kind of recognition and desire he had longed for, to be needed and wanted by people because of his willingness to protect his precious people. That brought an even bigger smile to Gaara's face as he thought about the person who told him that expression. He would have to thank Naruto the next time they saw each other. Several miles away from Suna, Deidre cursed as he sat down on the ground in exhaustion. Not only had he lost an arm, but he multiple second and even a third-degree burn from that explosion. What the hell was that anyway? 1 minute he had been about to enact his plan to use the village as a means to force Gaara to use his special sand so he could set his trap. Then his jutsu gets swallowed up and somehow ends up exploding on him. The very thought that his art could do that sounded ridiculous, and yet it had somehow happened. Deidre-senpai. Deidre cursed as he turned to Akatsuki's newest member. Toby was an oddball who wore an orange spiral mask centered around his right eye hole. He didn't know anything about the man other than he was childish and annoying. What do you want? Deidre asked with a glare on his face. Oho-senpai is mad. Toby yelled as he threw his hands in the air and began to run around in circles. Toby, I swear if you, Leader Sama wants a report on the One-Tails. Deidre turned to the man who interrupted him. Zetsu was man who looked like he had been swallowed by a plant and had just his head sticking out. One half of him was white while the other was black. It had been a common joke among Akatsuki that this showed that Zetsu was half good and half evil. Of course there was some truth to that. The white side was fairly polite and not as interested in fighting, while the black side was a lot more violent and liked to feast on human flesh. I wasn't able to get the Aikibi, Deidre said, but it wasn't my fault, yeah. He added hastily as he held his one good arm out in defense. I was just about to capture him with my high-yield C3 when it got sucked into some kind of wormhole. It was weird, yeah. And then my own bird exploded, and if it wasn't for a quick carry-me I would be dead, yeah. As Deidre explained what happened, Toby had gone silent. His explosion was sucked up. Why does that sound so familiar? What about Sasori, where is he? Asked Zetsu. Don't know, Deidre shrugged. I didn't see him, yeah. This is not good, we will need to report this to Pain-sama. Zetsu spoke. Don't worry, Toby will tell him. Toby shouted out as he waved an arm around. After all, Toby is a good boy. It was night and Gara was currently walking down the hall of the cage tower to finish the paperwork that this incident was going to cause. He would also have to send a letter to Konoha letting them know Akatsuki was on the move. Gara stayed up like this most nights anyway. Since he had the Ikibi inside of him, Gara could not sleep lest the giant Tanuki take over and go on a rampage. Though he had gotten used to not sleeping, walking up to his door, Gara tensed at feeling a presence already inside. Being cautious, Gara opened the door and stepped inside as he summoned his sand in case he had to fight. The sand returned to his gourd as soon as he saw who it was. It was the shinobi who he was positive had helped him, sitting at his desk with his feet propped onto it, the one Gara was sure had used that odd jutsu. Who are you? Gara asked wearily. Just because this guy had helped him did not automatically make him a friend. I'm rather hurt that you would talk to a friend in such a way, Gara, the cloaked figure said as he stood up. Gara tensed as the man walked away from the desk, only for his hands to fall slack at his side as the man removed his hood and face mask. Naruto? Gara questioned, and though it was still emotionless, those who knew Gara could tell he was surprised. Naruto grinned. It's been a long time, Gara. A little over 3 years if I'm not mistaken. Gara blinked once, twice, thrice. That was you who helped me, wasn't it? Of course, Naruto said with a smirk. I was on my way to visit since I had just captured a bounty near here when I saw your battle. Naruto shrugged as he walked up to Gara. I decided to step in when I saw that large explosion, which reminds me. Naruto reached into his pocket and pulled out a scroll. He put it out to Gara, who was looking at it. Inside is the person who was that man's partner, I believe. He had been standing just outside the gates as I was making my way in. I believe he is a shinobi that was once a part of Suna and figured you may want his body back. Gara took the scroll and noticed that it had the kanji for puppet on it. I will give this to my morticians later. Gara walked over to his desk and set the scroll down before turning back to Naruto. It is good see you again, Namikaze. Naruto rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. So you know about that, eh? Gara actually smirked. I doubt there is a single person within the elemental nations who has not heard of the rebirth of the Kuroi Senku. Word traveled to Suna after Tsunade made a public announcement of your heritage to the people of Konoha. I bet that went over well, Naruto said with a grimace. I wonder how they reacted. I'm afraid I couldn't tell you since I was not there, Gara said as he sat down at his desk. The young Kazekage looked over at Naruto again. It was obvious the blonde had not been here just for a visit. The timing between the attack and Naruto's rescue were far too convenient for the blonde to have just arrived for a visit. But Gara saw that it was equally obvious his first and possibly best friend did not want to talk about how he knew Akatsuki would attack, and while a part of Gara wanted to ask about his knowledge on Akatsuki, another part decided to trust in his friend. I hear you have been training with Jiraiya of the Sennin, Gara said as he gestured to a seat in front of his desk. Naruto grinned as he sat down. Yeah, I am. It's pretty awesome actually. It was a beautiful and peaceful day in Konoha as the sun began to rise, however one Tsunade Senju was not awake to see it. Said blonde Hokage was currently sleeping with her head on her desk. Sake bottles littered both her table and the floor. Her head was lying on the paperwork that she did not do last night. It had a decent amount of drool on it, ruining the ink and ensuring Tsunade would have to rewrite it. However, Tsunade noticed none of this as she was blissfully unaware, until the door to her office slammed open. Tsunade-sama. Wah. I wasn't drinking, I swear. Tsunade's head shot off of the desk as she shouted. Shizune, who had barged in, was silent as she looked at the Hokage, then looked at all the sake bottles littering the floor. Honestly, Tsunade-sama, can you please not drink yourself into a stupor for once? Especially since you're on the job, Shizune said as she stared at the busty blonde Hokage. Tsunade flushed with embarrassment but recovered quickly as she coughed into her hand. So is there a reason you came barging in here? Shizune blinked before her eyes widened. Yes, we just received word from Suna that they were attacked by Akatsuki. What? Tsunade yelled in a voice so loud that everyone who was within 2 miles of the Hokage tower could hear it. Shizune nodded as she handed Tsunade a scroll. Thankfully the attack failed and Kazekage Dono is safe. Tsunade read the scroll and frowned. A friend of Suna. She looked up at Shizune. Do you know who this friend of Suna that the Kazekage is speaking of is? Shizune shook her head. No Tsunade-sama, I only know that he helped Kazekage Dono sometime during the battle. Tsunade looked back at the scroll and thought, well, at least the Kazekage and Ikibi are safe from Akatsuki for now. Though I want you to inform Jiraiya of this friend of Suna and see if he can find any information on who this friend that the Kazekage mentioned is. Shizune bowed. Hi Tsunade-sama. Naruto frowned as he looked down at the small clearing. It was near the mining town where his mark was, but that was not what was causing him to frown. All around the small clearing were markers that no doubt marked graves. There were several people who were currently digging a hole for a new grave. That in itself was not weird. What was, however, that was there were more people who were putting someone into a coffin with that person still being alive and crying out in terror. Right next to those people was another man who, like the others putting the petrified man into the coffin, was wearing a set of robes. Said man had a handkerchief to his face as he wiped what were obviously false tears from his eyes. Rikusuke, why are you crying? The man asked through his false tears. Do you not like the beautiful funeral I'm giving you? The man now known as Rikusuke continued to scream in terror and plead with the other man. Don't worry, despite your obvious lack of respect, I will always remember you fondly. The other people were finally able to put the man in the coffin and shut the lid before bolting it down with nails. As they brought the coffin over to the now finished grave, the man which Naruto finally recognized as Raiga Kurosuke began to make a speech about the person they were giving the funeral to. Naruto listened in disgust as the funeral came to an end. When he was sure the group was gone, Naruto walked over to the grave. Creating several cage bushes, Naruto had them dig the man out. They pulled up the coffin and smashed through the top. Pulling out the man who was half delirious, Naruto ordered his clones to take him to the Curry of Life shop that he had seen on his way here. He looked over at where Raiga and the others left. Now all he had to do was take care of them. Naruto looked out over the small mining town as he crouched down from atop of a cliff. The town was fairly small, with only a few buildings that Naruto recognized as taverns and shops. The blonde did not see any houses, which led him to assume that the people had houses just outside the town itself. As he studied the layout, Naruto also looked at its people. They were doing severe manual labor as groups of people moved in and out of the mines. The people were surrounded by members of Raiga's gang, which was obvious by the cloaks they were wearing. The blonde counted 8 in all. One of the people, an old man, seemed to be wobbling under the strain of his load and fell down panting. 2 of the cloaked men came up to the old man and began taunting and kicking him, telling him to get back up and work unless he wanted to have Raiga give him a funeral. Deciding enough was enough, Naruto disappeared in a burst of speed, shooting down the cliff and heading for the mining town. Naruto soon came up on the 2 people beating the old man. Without giving them time to react in any way, shape or form, Naruto smashed his fists into the men's heads. As they went flying, Naruto disappeared in another burst of speed, knocking out every cloaked figure that was here. When it was all done, Naruto looked around at the stunned figures of the people in the town. I suggest all of you head home for now, Naruto spoke up in a clear voice that rang across the town. This place is no doubt going to become a battlefield, and I do not wish for any of you to be caught in the crossfire. Please make your way to your homes. The people looked at him like he had grown a second head, before they looked at each other. Not knowing what else to do, they followed Naruto's advice and starting leaving. As they were, another group of thugs appeared running down a hill up to Naruto's left-hand side. With a small grunt, Naruto kicked himself off the ground and flew towards the thugs, smashing into them with all the fury of a hurricane. Naruto began to twist and turn as he dodged the pathetic weapons of his enemies, lashing out with his own kicks and punches. The people he was fighting were extremely weak by shinobi standards, and Naruto made quick work of them. Looking around, Naruto frowned when he did not spot Raiga anywhere. He had been hoping that he could lure the man out by taking care of the members of his gang, yet he could not find Raiga anywhere. Little did he know that Raiga was standing on the same cliff he had been before beginning his assault. Well, I did not expect to find such an adversary in this small town, Raiga said in his insane voice. He turned his head to look at the bag on his back. Are you ready? Hi Raiga-sama, I am ready. Surprisingly, the answer came from the large sack on the man's back. Good, then let's get started. Naruto frowned as a thick mist came in and his senses began to go haywire, telling him that he was surrounded by enemy shinobi. Closing his eyes, Naruto began to block out all forms of distraction. Reaching out, Naruto tried to gain a sense of the chakra being used for what was obviously some form of illusion. Finally he found what he was looking for up on the cliff that he had been on before he started his assault. Looking towards and focusing chakra to his eyes, he found a cloaked figure with a large bag on his back. Naruto channeled chakra into his legs and took off running towards the cliff. Once he got there he jumped onto the cliff face and began running up the wall. There was a puff of smoke in his hand as Naruto unsealed Susanna. He got to the top of the cliff and in a burst of speed jumped at the smirking form of Raiga. Clang. Naruto's blade clashed with Raiga's too in a battle for dominance. The two soon jumped away as they eyed each other. Well, look what we have here, Raiga said with an insane grin. I have heard many things about you, Namikaze-san. Naruto stayed weary of the man in front who was acting too confident for his liking. Then you should know that you stand no chance against me. Hey, Raiga smirked as he got into a low stance with his two swords. You're more than welcome to think that. You should be prepared to fall by my blade, maybe. Afterwards I'll even give you a funeral. Naruto said nothing as he held Susanna in a reverse grip and got into his stance, with his blade held in front and his knees slightly bent. The two stayed that way for a while before a slight breeze rustled through the area, which was when both fighters kicked off and began their kenjutsu match. Their forms were mere blurs as the two clashed blades, disappearing only to reappear again when their swords locked. The battle soon picked up in intensity as the landscape began to change, large cracks appearing where the two met due to the power behind their strikes. When they met again, Raiga tried to disarm Naruto, using the hooks at the end of one of his blades to grab at Susanna. When the blonde shinobi found out what Raiga was trying to do, he jumped away and made a slashing motion with his sword. A Kase no Yibe was launched from the tip and shot towards Raiga, who was forced to dodge. Putting his swords above his head in a cross guard, Raiga began to channel lightning into his blade, which soon took the shape of a ball. Raiden. Raikyu. Lightning release. Lightning ball. Naruto deftly dodged the attack before making a slicing motion with his sword and sending a Kase no Yibe to Raiga. Said man merely jumped out of the way. Naruto appeared right in front of him and began kenjutsu match with the swordsman, going in with an alternative mix of low and high strikes aimed at vitals and tendons in the hopes of either killing the man outright or crippling him. None of it seemed to work as Naruto continued his assault. Not only did the man seem to know what he was going to do before he did it, but his two swords also gave him the advantage of more weaponry, nullifying Naruto's advantage in speed. Naruto ducked under a horizontal slash from the man, before bringing up his sword in an attempt to impale Raiga through the stomach. Said swordsman sidestepped the attack and used his left blade to push it out of the way, coming in with his right with a slash to take off Naruto's head. Naruto leaned his head back, letting the attack narrowly miss him. Bringing up his blade in a reverse grip, he blocked Raiga's next slash. Pushing against the blade, Naruto managed to open a hole in his opponent's guard. Switching to a standard grip, Naruto slashed in an upwards diagonal cross that would vivisect Raiga. Said swordsman blocked the attack with one of his blades. Before he could counter, however, Naruto pushed Susanna off the swordsman's blade and made a downwards diagonal slash. Raiga blocked that with his other blade and made an attempt to slice Naruto in half. Said blonde jumped back before the blade passed through to where he had been. As he charged again, Naruto felt the man channel Raiden chakra into his blades, channeling his own Fuden chakra. As the two locked blades, the blonde shinobi was able to negate the effects of the man's Raiden chakra. The two began to push against each other in a contest of strength, each vying to push the other off balance. Raiga was the one to eventually slip as Naruto's immense physical prowess proved to be too much. Jumping back, the mad swordsman gained some distance. My, you're quite good. You truly live up to the rumors I've been hearing about you. When I kill you, I will make your funeral my most amazing piece of work, Raiga said with a twisted smile into his face. Naruto paid attention to none of the man's speech of funerals as he studied his opponent, as he tried to analyze his enemy. Raiga was only an A-rank ninja, so he should not be this good. That meant he had some kind of gimmick or something that was giving him an edge in this battle. He eyed the sack that was on the man's back. Raiga had been awfully protective of it. He would bet his fortune from his book Loveless that whatever it was that was helping him was in there. Naruto immediately put a plan into action to separate Raiga from whatever was in the bag, throwing several kunai at the man who deftly dodged or blocked them, but that was okay. These kunai were not meant to hit, but rather to hide one of Naruto's Hiraishin kunai. Naruto took one of the frog kenjutsu kata stances as he disappeared in a bright yellow flash and reappeared right next to Raiga. He slashed the bag off the man's back and kicked the man in the stomach, sending him flying to the ground and then knocking him out with a kick to the head. He caught the bag and set it on the ground, frowning at how it felt. The bag had something roughly shaped like a human and was breathing. He undid the bag and opened it up, only to find himself staring into a pair of red eyes. A child. Naruto questioned. You were the one giving Raiga that edge in the battle, weren't you? The little boy said nothing. Naruto sighed, knowing he wasn't going to get any answers out of the boy and refused to torture a mere child. He created Akage and began to give it orders: seal Raiga's head in a scroll, burn the body. The clone saluted and was about to go off when a voice stopped him. No. Naruto looked at the kid again. Excuse me. Don't kill him. Raiga is all I have in this world. He's the only person to ever want me for something, the boy said, tears running down his eyes. Naruto looked at the kid as he remembered another person who had the same fanatical and loyal devotion to another. It was the person who had told him what it meant to be strong and set him on his path, Haku. He saw the same eyes in this boy that he saw in Haku's almost 4 years ago when he had met him in the clearing during the wave mission. Naruto closed his eyes and sighed. Very well. He turned to his clone. Seal him in a prisoner transportation scroll. We'll take him to Kiri and ask if he can't be given a pardon. He turned back to the now stunned kid. Hey kid, what's your name? Rinmara, he said. Well Rinmara, it's your lucky day as I happen to be friends with the new Mizukage, so he may just get off being killed. However, both of you will have to come with me so I can give my account to the Mizukage myself. Naruto stood up and lifted the boy on his shoulders. Deciding he didn't want to walk, Naruto sent a pulse of chakra through his seal towards Mei's Hiraishin Ch, letting her know he was on his way. Hey kid, you might want to hang on tight, this is going to get a little disorienting. Wah! Rinmara didn't even get to finish as Naruto and he disappeared in a bright yellow flash. They reappeared nearly a second later. Rinmara looked around extremely disoriented until he heard a cry of Naru-kun, and turned his attention to the source. A beautiful red-haired woman wearing the Mizukage robes, said woman who looked like she was about to tackle the blonde shinobi but stopped when she noticed Ranmaru's presence. Naru-kun, who is this? Mei asked as she looked at Rinmara with her head slightly tilted to the side. Naruto gave her a smile. Mei-hime, this is Rinmara. Rinmara, this is Mei-hime, Naruto said, introducing the two. Rinmara is the companion of Raiga Kurosuke, Naruto stated as he watched Mei look at him with interest. This I need to hear, Mei said with a smirk as she sat down on the couch and gestured for Naruto to take a seat. Setting Rinmara down on the couch, Naruto took a seat next to Mei, right before he pulled Mei onto his lap and began to explain how he had gotten into a battle with Raiga. Mei wrapped her arms around his neck and rested her head on his shoulder as she listened with a large smile and rapt attention as Naruto told his tale. She had always found it amusing that the blonde was such a good storyteller. Even more amusing was that unlike others, she knew the blonde shinobi was actually telling the truth without any serious embellishing, since he was far too modest and found it embarrassing to be considered a hero. As she listened to Naruto finish his story as well as his request, she closed her eyes as she thought about what he was asking. In truth, she was actually pleased to know that it might be possible to get another of the Kiri no Shinobigatana Nananin Shu in her ranks. While the war was over and she had more shinobi than she expected to have, any help she could get to bolster her ranks was appreciated. I will ask him if he would like to rejoin our forces, Mei said after a moment, much to Ranmaru's joy. Having another member, the Kiri no Shinobigatana Nananin Shu, will greatly help to bolster our ranks, and since Raiga left during Yagura's reign, the man's bounty holds no real value. Naruto turned to the little red-eyed child with a grin. See kiddo, nothing to worry about. Anbu. Mei called out. The door opened and in stepped two Anbu officer who ignored the presence of the blonde and red-eyed child as they looked at Mei awaiting her orders. Naruto grinned that the two were not surprised to see him. Naruto had often been seen coming out of the office with Mei without entering, for nearly 2 years, and he had given more than half of the Anbu heart attacks every time he would Hiraishin here. It was good to see they were learning. I would like you to find someone to give Rinmara here a tour of Kiri, Mei said, gesturing to Rinmara. When you're finished, make sure he is taken to my house. I'll have him stay there while we wait for Raiga's decision on whether or not he will join us. Also, someone will need to carry him since he cannot walk on his own. The Anbu nodded, though Naruto could sense they were surprised about Raiga. One of them picked up the child while the other was handed the scroll that had Raiga in it. Also, May continued, I want you to check in with some of the doctors to see if any of them are capable of healing Ranmaru's legs. The Anbu nodded and left, closing the door after them. As soon as the two of them were alone, May pulled Naruto into a heated kiss. Having expected this, Naruto returned the kiss and began to gently nibble on May's bottom lip. When the busty red-haired Kage opened her mouth to let out a low moan, Naruto slipped his tongue into her mouth. The two soon began a small duel with their tongues entwining each other, trying to get the upper hand. Naruto decided to submit to May and retracted his tongue to grant her access. May eagerly began to explore every crevice of his mouth, enjoying the sweet taste Naruto had. May pushed Naruto down onto the couch so he was laying down as she straddled his waist, still kissing him as her hands began to run through Naruto's sun-kissed hair. Naruto likewise had wrapped one arm around her waist as the other began to gently massage and fondle May's firm butt. It was about half an hour later that they stopped their small makeout session. May smiled as she closed her eyes, giving a content sigh as her head rested on Naruto's chest. Even though it had only been around 2 weeks since she had last seen him, she still missed him. The blonde always managed to keep things from being boring and was able to light up her day just by being with her. Koishi, beloved? Naruto asked, causing May to smile at one of his frequently used suffixes. Yes, Koibito. May responded. Are you done with your paperwork for the day? May raised her head to look at Naruto and saw the small glint in his eyes, causing her to smirk. Naruto and May smiled and waved to another group of villagers they passed as they walked arm in arm around the village. They had no clear destination in mind and just kept on the move while enjoying each other's company. It was something they had done often when Naruto was around, simply walking around Kiri or whatever town Naruto summoned May to and walked around until something caught their fancy. Eventually the couple settled down at a small stand with Naruto deciding to go with some beef ramen and May ordering a miso ramen. As the two waited for their meal, they discussed some of the new things going on in their life. May told him about the new batch of shinobi that just got out of the academy sometime last week. She hoped to have them ready for the Chunin exam next year and was having them trained by some of her more talented Jonin. Naruto told her about some of his travels, leaving out his stint at saving Gaara. Not that he didn't want to tell her, but with so many people around he did not feel comfortable talking about it here. You know, I almost wish I could just go wherever I want now that I'm stuck to my desk, May said in a teasing voice as she gave him a pout. Naruto affected a mock-hurt expression as he made a few sniffling noises. I thought you got to do that already, or is spending time with your fiancé outside of Kiri not good enough for you? That was another thing that had happened. After Naruto had made that movie with Koyuki, he had officially proposed to both May and Yugito. Well, he had after he made it up to them. When the two had heard that their Naruto had been in a porno, they had been downright furious. Thankfully Naruto had made sure Jiraiya sent that letter, which Naruto had changed the contents of making it sound like the perverted sage had blackmailed him, which had not only gotten Jiraiya beaten but also had his testes melted by May's Yoden when Naruto had summoned them via Hiraishin. Naruto shook his head. Jiraiya had to be used to taking a shitload of punishment to still be able to use his package after something like that. That was not to say Naruto had been let off the hook. It had taken Naruto spending an entire week with May as something of a personal slave to get her to forgive him. Though Naruto would not call what she did punishment, he would often take her out to eat or make her food or just treat her like a goddess anyways, so it was no different than what they usually did. May had also made him give her a full-body massage. Of course that was anything but punishment for the blonde. Though there was also the time when she had taken Naruto shopping, which he really did not mind doing things like this for her. Unlike others of the male gender, he would often do the same thing for Koyuki, Yugito and Konan. He remembered that this time May had gotten a devious streak and had come out of the changing room one time in nothing but lacy blue lingerie. Naruto remembered the way the light blue cloth had not only hugged her curves but had been slightly see-through, making it give you enough of a view to tantalize you and make you want more, but not enough to see everything. Naruto had been blown out of the store by a nosebleed so large he had gone through the store wall and blacked out. Sigh good times. May smacked his shoulder in a playful gesture, snapping him out of his thoughts. You know what I mean. Naruto nodded sagely. All that paperwork. He looked at her with a mischievous grin. You could do what Ba-chan does and just drink yourself stupid until you forget about it. Mei laughed as Naruto started telling her stories of when he would find the Hokage whom he called Tsunade Ba-chan getting so drunk that she would oftentimes fall asleep at her desk, only to get scolded by her assistant the next morning. Add on to that fact that Naruto would call one of the legendary three Sennin and the one most known for her super strength and violent temper. Ba-chan merely added onto the humor. When their food came, the two quieted down to eat, keeping a comfortable silence until they finished. Afterwards the two walked out as Mei held one of Naruto's arms in both of hers, pressing it into the valley of her breast much to the jealousy of both males who wanted Mei and females who desired to have Naruto. As they walked around, Mei looked over at a store where she apparently saw something that caught her attention and began to drag Naruto into it, said Blonde just grinning at Mei's enthusiasm. It was 4 orgasms and several hours later that the two dropped onto the bed, Naruto flopping onto his back as Mei laid in between his legs while still connected to the blonde Uzumaki Namikaze heir. Wrapping her arms around Naruto's broad chest, Mei let out an utterly exhausted yet content sigh, the afterglow from the sex still having not faded and probably would not for some time. Naruto wrapped one arm around Mei's waist as the other began to caress and massage Mei's firm butt. That feels good. Just what you need after several hours session of hot passionate sex, nay? Asked Naruto with a quiet chuckle. Mei murmured as she kissed his chest. Do you think you could continue doing this until I fall asleep? Of course, Naruto said as he added a small amount of chakra. Mei smiled as she let out a soft sigh, eventually succumbing to exhaustion. Naruto stayed awake a little longer as he brought the blanket over their nude forms, kissing her on the head. The blonde shinobi let out a deep breath as he smiled. Closing his eyes, he let himself fall into a dreamless sleep. The next day Naruto and Mei were walking around town later in the afternoon, with the Mizukage having a rather noticeable limp. It seemed they had gone at it so hard last night that Mei had actually been unable to get out of bed this morning. For a while it had been rather funny to watch her try and get up only to fall face down again. Of course then she started cursing him out for laughing at her and promised to melt him if he did this again, which they both knew this would happen again just like it did the first time when she said the same thing. They ignored the stairs as they made their way to the Mizukage Tower, giving a greeting to her assistant and the Anbu at the door to her office. Making their way inside, Mei went over to her desk and sat down, sighing as she noticed the pile of paperwork that had seemingly grown anew overnight. Naruto walked behind her and began to give her shoulders a gentle message. Mei looked up at him and smiled before grabbing the first sheet of her paperwork and began to read. Jiraiya didn't even bat an eyelash as Naruto appeared right next to him in a yellow flash. Having grown used to it over the past few years, the Sennin merely looked at his student. You took a little longer than expected for a simple rank ninja, Jiraiya stated as he looked at his student with a small hint of suspicion in his eyes. Jiraiya had just received a letter from Tsunade, telling him about someone who came to help Gaara when he was attacked by the Akatsuki. Naruto merely shrugged. He had this one kid who seemed to have a bloodline that allowed him to see everything like the Byakugan. It made him a lot harder to hit. Besides, I decided to spend some time with Mei-chan. While it was not a lie, it wasn't the whole truth either. He did not want it getting out that he helped kill 2 members of the Akatsuki yet. While the blonde had no doubt that it would happen eventually, Naruto had no desire to have Akatsuki begin to feel he was a threat. This would also hopefully keep them guessing about who this new enemy was. Jiraiya's narrowed eyes soon gave way Naruto a lecherous grin. As he completely forgot about Tsunade's letter, Hohosuyu were hanging out with the hot redhead this time. I can't say I blame you, she's Ero-sensei. If I hear you make a perverted comment about her or the other girls, I am going to Rasenshuriken your ass back to the time of the Rakudo Sennin. Jiraiya closed his mouth, though his grin remained in place as the two continued to walk down the dirt road. We have about 5 months left until you return to Konoha, Jiraiya said after a few moments. I don't believe there is anything more I can teach you within the time frame. Jiraiya looked at Naruto with a proud smile. I want you to know I'm proud of you, you've really come a long way. Naruto looked at his sensei and smiled. Despite the arguments they would get into, most of which were when he made a perverted comment about Naruto and one of his girls, the man was still the closest thing to a father he had. Thanks, Jiraiya-sensei, Naruto replied. This is the only time that you're going to call me that, isn't it? Jiraiya deadpanned. Naruto's smile turned into a grin. Of course is it. The rest of the way to their destination, Jiraiya cried anime tears as he complained about not getting enough respect. Omake. Jiraiya's punishment point. 1. It was late at night and Jiraiya had passed out on the futon on the hotel he and Naruto were staying at. It had been about a month since the Ika Ika movie had hit the market and everything had been going great for the Toad Senin as his fan base went crazy over the movie. Unfortunately for the white-haired pervert, some people were not happy about this movie. More specifically, they were not happy that Naruto had been in it. It was because of this that one Mei Terumi had been summoned here via Hiraishin by Naruto. The busty red-headed Mizukage had been planning this ever since the movie had come out and she saw that her Naruto had been in it. She and Naruto entered the room where Jiraiya was currently sleeping. He was lightly snoring while mumbling about beautiful woman not being able to get enough of him. There were numerous sake bottles littering floor showing that he had gotten extremely drunk this night and would no doubt be out of it until morning. The two of them threw the blanket off of the man and stripped him down until he was in his underwear before tying his hands to the head of the bed, while his feet were bound to the end. The two then waited for till morning for the man to wake up. It was sometime around 11 o'clock when Jiraiya stirred. Opening his eyes, he looked around blearily before trying to rub his face with a hand. When he could not move either of his hands, he opened his eyes and turned his head to find that his hands were bound to the bed. He tugged on them but found they were tied so tightly he could not even move them a centimeter. Looking down, he noticed that his feet were bound in the same way. Good morning, Jiraiya. Jiraiya froze as he heard the overly happy feminine voice. It was one he easily recognized. The tone was one women use when they are about to cause a pervert extreme pain. Looking over near the door, Naruto found Mei standing there with her arms crossed and the most sadistic smile he had seen to date. The Toad Senin paled but tried to hide his fear with a smile. Hey Mizukage Dono, how are you today? He winced as the smile widened. Oh, I'm just great, thanks for asking, she chirped as she walked up to him, the shadows from her bangs hiding her eyes and added with her smile was making her look like something that came from hell itself. I mean, I just found out a little while ago that my Naruto was in a porno which you had made. Jiraiya's face became as white as the sheets he was sleeping on. And now am I Mizukage Dono, for blackmailing my Naru-kun into making your perverted movie, you must be punished, Mei said with her last words being merely a whisper. Jiraiya felt his eyes widen as he realized what was happening and how he had been duped. Damn you, Naruto. Mei went through several hand seals before she called out her jutsu. Yoten. Ryusui no Yugen. Lava release. Stream of lava. A stream of lava was shot from Mei's mouth and hit Jiraiya's goodies before melting them.